I thought love made you weak, Matteo whispered. It made you dangerous. Because for the first time in my life, I have something I'm willing to burn everything to keep. His eyes blazed. I'll burn everything to the ground before I lose you. You are listening to a story exclusively narrated on the Dark Romance Stories channel. Relax and step into the world of love stories filled with mystery, emotions, and passion. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment to support us. This content is the property of Dark Romance Stories. Please do not copy or re-upload it in any form. The last thing Isabella Conti remembered of her ordinary life was the sound of her own heels echoing against concrete. It was 2:47 in the morning, and the parking garage beneath the Mercy Grace private hospital in Manhattan was the colour of dead nerves, grey, fluorescent, humming with a light that never quite decided whether it was on or off. She had just closed a 9-hour craniotomy, peeling a tumour the size of a plum away from a stockbroker's motor cortex without leaving him mute. Her hands still remembered the weight of the retractor. Her mind was already halfway into the hot shower, waiting for her in her apartment on the Upper West Side. She did not notice the black Suburban parked across 2 spaces until it was too late. Isabella was 32 years old, and she had built her entire adult life on the belief that precision could protect a person. She was the youngest attending neurosurgeon the hospital had ever named to its board. She wore her dark hair pinned back with the severity of a woman who had learned that beauty was a distraction other people used against you. She did not date the residents. She did not drink at the galas. She trusted scalpels and MRI contrast and her own 2 hands, and almost nothing else. None of that helped her now. A man stepped out of the shadow of a support pillar, enormous, grey-suited, his face as blank as a closed door. Before she could scream, a second man was behind her, and a cloth that smelled of chemical sweetness pressed against her mouth and nose. She fought. She was not a woman who fainted. She drove her elbow back into something soft and heard a grunt, and for one wild second her keys were in her fist like a weapon, the way the self-defense instructor had taught her years ago. "Don't hurt her," a voice said, low and flat from the direction of the Suburban. "You touch her wrong, you answer to me." She had time to register that the voice belonged to a younger man, cold, controlled, standing in the open door of the vehicle with his hands in his coat pockets as though he were merely waiting for valet parking. He had dark eyes. That was the last detail her mind filed before the sweetness dragged her down into black water. When she woke, she was not dead, and she was not in a warehouse, and she was not, as some distant, terrified part of her had assumed, in a shallow grave. She was in a bed. A real bed, a vast 4-poster thing with linen sheets that cost more than her monthly salary, in a room with tall windows that showed a slate-coloured dawn breaking over water. The Long Island Sound, she would learn later. She was still in her scrubs. Someone had taken off her shoes and set them neatly by the door, toes pointed out, and somehow that small courtesy was more frightening than any threat. There was a woman in the room, older, in a black uniform dress, her hands folded. "You're awake," the woman said, in an accent Isabella couldn't place. "Il dottore. Good. They're waiting for you." "Who is waiting for me?" Isabella's voice cracked. Her throat was raw from the chemical. "Where am I? You can't do this. Do you understand kidnapping? Do you understand federal—" "Please dress." The woman set a stack of folded clothes on the bed, soft grey cashmere, black trousers, everything in her size, which meant they had known her measurements before they took her. He will explain, or he won't. But you'll come with me either way, Dottoressa, and it goes easier if you walk. Isabella did not walk easily. She stood at the window first and tried to understand the geography of her captivity. The manicured lawn stretching down to a stone seawall, the two men in dark coats patrolling it with the loose alertness of soldiers, the security cameras nestled in the eaves like watching birds. This was not a place a person escaped by climbing out a window. This was a fortress that had simply chosen to look like a home. She dressed because there was no dignity in being dragged. The hallway they walked her down was hung with oil paintings, real ones, she suspected, the kind museums beg for. The house smelled of beeswax and old money, and, underneath it, something antiseptic that her trained nose caught immediately. A sick-room smell. Someone in this palace was very ill. They brought her to a set of double doors, and the older woman knocked once, and the doors opened, and Isabella walked into a bedroom that had been converted, with obscene amounts of money, into an intensive care unit. A hospital bed sat where a lover's bed should have been. Monitors glowed. An IV tree stood like a chrome sentinel. And in the bed lay a man. Old, powerful even in unconsciousness, silver-haired, his face the ruin of what had clearly been a striking one. A ventilator breathed for him with soft, mechanical sighs. His skull was bandaged. Isabella's eyes, against her will, went to work. The trach, the lines, the neuro readouts on the screen that told a story her heart understood before her fear did. Coma. Traumatic brain injury. Days old, maybe a week. "His name," said a voice she recognized, "is Alessandro Caruso, and you are going to keep him alive." She turned. The man from the parking garage stood by the window with the grey light on his face, and Isabella's first coherent thought, absurd, unwelcome, immediate, was that she had never seen anyone so beautiful and so cold at once. He was perhaps 35, tall, in a charcoal suit with no tie, his black hair swept back, his jaw shadowed, his eyes the flat dark of a man who had stopped being surprised by the world a long time ago. He did not look like a monster. He looked like the still surface of very deep water. "You kidnapped me," Isabella said. Her voice did not shake, and she was proud of that. "You drugged me. You will let me go, or every agency in this country—" "No one is coming," the man said, without cruelty, which was worse than cruelty. "No one knows where you are. As far as your hospital knows, Dr. Conti requested emergency personal leave at 4 this morning by email. As far as your building's doorman knows, you flew to Milan for a family matter." He moved toward her, unhurried. "I am Matteo Caruso. That man is my father. 6 days ago, someone put a bullet in his head. 3 surgeons have already looked at him. 2 told me he would die within the week. 1 told me the truth, that the only person in this city who might bring him back is a neurosurgeon named Isabella Conti." He stopped an arm's length away. Up close, his eyes were not flat at all. They were burning. "So you will not be leaving," Matteo Caruso said quietly. "Not until my father opens his eyes. You have my word that no harm comes to you while you're under this roof. You have my word on everything else too, that if you run, I will find you, and if he dies, I cannot promise what the rest of this family will do with the doctor who let him. A pause. I would rather you didn't make me choose between my word and their knives, Dottoressa. Save him. Then we'll talk about the rest of your life. Outside, the sun broke the water into 1,000 knives of light, and Isabella Conti understood that her ordinary life was over. There is a particular kind of clarity that comes to a surgeon in a crisis, and Isabella reached for it now the way a drowning woman reaches for a rope. "If I'm going to keep him alive," she said, turning her back on Matteo Caruso and stepping toward the bed, "I need everything. His chart, his imaging, every drug he's had, the name of whoever placed these lines. They did it well, so someone here knows medicine. I need a portable CT within the hour, or I'm working blind. And working blind is how your father dies before lunch." She pulled back the sheet, checked the man's pupillary response with a penlight from her own scrub pocket that no one had thought to take. "And I need you to stop talking to me like a hostage negotiator. I'm a physician. Let me be one." Something flickered across Matteo's face. Surprise, maybe, or the first grudging respect. "The imaging is on the tablet by the monitor. A doctor named Renato placed the lines. He comes twice a day." "Renato is a real doctor?" "He lost his license." Matteo's mouth curved without humour. "We collect people the world throws away. Sometimes they're useful." Isabella swept up the tablet and began scrolling through the scans, and the room fell away. The bleed, the trajectory, the pressure numbers. She murmured to herself in the private language of her profession, and for 20 full minutes she forgot to be afraid, because fear and focus cannot occupy the same mind, and she had chosen focus her whole life precisely because it was the one drug that always worked. When she finally looked up, Matteo had not moved. He was watching her with an intensity that made the back of her neck prickle. "Well?" he said. "He has a subdural hematoma that's been partially evacuated. Competently, I'll give your unlicensed man that. But there's residual pressure, and the coma is as much protective as it is damage. His brain is hiding." She set the tablet down. "I can manage this. I can keep him stable, control the pressure, watch for the window when he might surface. But understand me, Mr. Caruso, I am not God. Brains are not tumours you cut out and win. He may wake tomorrow. He may wake in 3 months. He may never wake, and there will be nothing you or your knives can do about it. And if you shoot me for a biological fact, you'll have murdered the only person keeping him breathing." The silence stretched. 3 months, Matteo said, as if tasting the number. "You said 3 months." "I said he may. Then you stay 3 months." He said it like a verdict. "You'll have everything you asked for, equipment, drugs, Renato at your command, a room, meals, whatever you need. You'll be watched, and you won't leave the grounds, but you won't be harmed. My father surfaces, and you walk out of here a rich woman with a story you'll never dare tell." He moved to the door, then paused, one hand on the frame. "There's something else you should know, since you value the truth so much." "What?" "Not everyone in this house wants him to wake up." His dark eyes held hers. "Be careful whose coffee you drink, Dottoressa. And if anyone but me offers to move you to a different room, you refuse. You come to me. Do you understand?" She didn't. Not fully. But she nodded, because instinct is faster than comprehension, and every instinct in her body was reading the man in front of her as the only wall between her and something much worse. They installed her in the sick room's antechamber, a smaller bedroom with a connecting door, so she could sleep within earshot of the monitor's alarms. Renato arrived at noon, a stooped, grey, exhausted man in his 60s, with the tremor of a former drinker and the sad, careful competence of someone who had once been very good and had lost everything but the skill. He watched her work for an hour, then said quietly in Italian, "You're better than the ones from the city. He was right to take you." "He kidnapped me." "Yes." Renato adjusted the IV rate with steady hands, the tremor vanishing the moment the work demanded it. "He does that, Matteo. When something matters enough, the ordinary rules stop mattering to him. It is the most dangerous thing about him, and, God help us all, the most reliable." He glanced at her sidelong. "He told you to be careful. Take him seriously. There are men in this house who have already decided you're a loose thread. In their world, loose threads get cut." "And you?" Isabella asked. "Whose thread are you?" The old man almost smiled. "I gave up choosing sides the day I gave up my medical license. I choose patience now. Right now, Dottoressa, that means I choose you." He handed her a fresh set of gloves. "Now, show me how a real surgeon manages intracranial pressure, and I'll show you where the cameras don't reach, in case you should ever need to have a conversation no one hears." That first night, unable to sleep, Isabella stood at the window of her gilded prison and watched the lights of a boat crawl across the black sound. And she thought about her mother. Her mother had died when Isabella was 11, a slow, private illness that no one ever fully explained to her. A beautiful woman with a sad mouth who had raised her alone in a small apartment in Queens and told her over and over, "Learn something they can never take from you, Bella. Learn to be necessary." Isabella had taken the advice literally. She had made herself the most necessary woman in any room she entered. She had become a person no one could throw away. And now she had been thrown away, into a mansion, into a coma, into the orbit of a man whose eyes she could still feel on her skin from across a room. She did not yet know that her mother's advice and her mother's sad mouth and this house full of dangerous men were all threads in the same terrible tapestry. She only knew that she was going to save the old man in the bed, because she was a doctor, and because she was necessary, and because, though she would have died before admitting it, some part of her wanted to see how the beautiful, cold, dangerous man would look at her when she did. The Caruso family did not eat together so much as convene, and on the third night of her captivity, Isabella was summoned. She almost refused, but Renato's warning still rang in her ears, "Loose threads get cut," and she understood, with the cold logic she applied to everything, that a hostage who hid in her room was a hostage easily forgotten and easily disposed of. A hostage who sat at the table, looked people in the eye, and made herself a person rather than a problem was harder to erase. So she wore the grey cashmere, pinned her hair, and walked into the dining room of the enemy with her chin up. The room could have hosted a coronation. A table of black walnut ran its length, set with silver and crystal and candlelight. and around it sat the men and women who ruled a hidden empire from Long Island. Isabella catalogued them the way she catalogued a surgical field, quickly, coldly, noting what would bleed. At the head, empty, was the Don's chair. Nobody sat in it. That absence said more about power than any of the faces. To its right sat Matteo, and beside him an empty place that Isabella would later learn was kept for a fiancé. Across from him sat a man of perhaps 55, silver at the temples, expensively dressed, with a smile like a knife wrapped in silk. This, she gathered from the deference around him, was Vittorio Caruso, the Don's younger brother, Matteo's uncle. "So this is our miracle worker." Vittorio rose and took her hand before she could withhold it, pressing his lips to her knuckles. His eyes moved over her without shame. "Alessandro always did have exquisite taste. Sit, dottoressa, sit. Tell us, will my brother wake to enjoy the world he built, or should we begin dividing it?" "Vittorio." Matteo's voice was quiet, but the whole table felt it. "She's a physician, not a fortune-teller." "I only ask what everyone here is thinking, nephew." Vittorio spread his hands, all warmth, and Isabella felt the danger in him, like a change in air pressure before a storm. "This family has been leaderless for 6 days. Blood runs cold when the head is asleep. Rivals circle. Decisions must be made, and the boy," a nod at Matteo, faintly contemptuous, "was designated heir, yes, but designation is not the same as strength. We are in an interregnum, and interregnums are dangerous. I'm sure the good doctor understands. Doctors know all about the body that keeps living after the brain has gone." Isabella held his gaze. "The brain hasn't gone," she said evenly. "That's rather the point of my being here." The table stilled. She had contradicted Vittorio Caruso, publicly, at his own brother's table. And then Matteo laughed, a low, short, surprising sound, the first time she had heard it. "She's right, uncle. You'll have to keep circling a while longer." He lifted his wine. "To the doctor. May she be very, very good at her job." The others drank. Vittorio drank too, smiling, and his eyes over the rim of the glass told Isabella she had just made an enemy who would remember. She did not eat much. She watched, and what she watched most was the way the family arranged itself around Matteo, the young lieutenants who deferred to him, the old capos who deferred to Vittorio, the invisible line running down the middle of the table like a fault in the earth. She understood then that she had not been kidnapped into a hospital. She had been kidnapped into a war, and the man in the coma was the only thing keeping the two armies from each other's throats. After dinner, Matteo found her on the terrace where she had fled to breathe. "You shouldn't have said that to him," he said, coming to stand beside her at the balustrade. The sound was black and endless below. "Vittorio does not forget slights. He collects them, the way other men collect debts. He was talking about your father, like a corpse to be inventoried." Isabella wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "I don't do well with people who write off patients I intend to save." Matteo was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed, lower, more human. "No, you don't." He studied her profile in the moonlight. "Why do you care whether he lives?" "He's nothing to you. He's a criminal, a monster, the head of an organization that has done things you can't imagine. Any sane woman would let him die and pray it bought her freedom. Isabella turned to face him. Because I took an oath. Because when a person is broken in front of me, I don't get to decide whether they deserve to be fixed. That's not the job. The job is to fix them. She paused. And because I think you already know I'm not going to let him die, which is the only reason you haven't handed me to your uncle's men. So don't test me, Mr. Caruso. I'm not a woman who folds. He looked at her for a long, long moment, and something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't name. Hunger, maybe, or recognition, the look of a man who has spent his whole life among the corrupt and has suddenly met something clean. No, he said softly, you're not. He straightened, and the mask came back down. Get some sleep, Dottoressa. Tomorrow I'll show you where the cameras are. Vittorio watches everything in this house, except the places I've made sure he can't. He turned to go, then stopped. And Isabella? It was the first time he'd used her name, and it landed somewhere low in her chest. Lock your door tonight, not because of me. Then he was gone, swallowed by the great dark house, and Isabella stood alone on the terrace, with her heart doing something it had no business doing. She was a prisoner. He was her jailer, a murderer's son, a man who had drugged her and stolen her from her life. She knew all of this with perfect clarity, and still, when she finally slept, it was his voice saying her name that followed her down into the dark. It happened on the 9th day, and it happened by accident, the way most true things do. Isabella had asked Renato for the Don's original wound documentation, the photographs, the surgical notes from the first frantic hours before she arrived. She needed to understand the trajectory of the bullet, to predict the pressure dynamics in his brain. It was a routine request. She spread the photographs across the desk in the antechamber under the good lamp, and she looked at them the way she looked at everything, carefully, coldly, seeing what was there rather than what she expected. And then she stopped breathing. The wound was wrong. Isabella had treated gunshot injuries during her residency at a trauma centre in the Bronx. She knew the difference between a distant shot and a close one, the way a sommelier knows a vintage. A bullet fired from across a room leaves a clean entry. A bullet fired from close range, inches, not feet, leaves something else. Stippling. The tattooing of unburned gunpowder driven into the skin around the wound, and, if close enough, the searing signature of muzzle gases. The photographs showed stippling. Dense, unmistakable, a dark constellation around the entry site above the Don's right ear. Alessandro Caruso had not been shot by a sniper. He had not been shot by a rival across a street or a restaurant. He had been shot by someone standing close enough to touch him. Someone he had let close. Isabella sat very still with the photograph in her hand, and felt the floor of her understanding shift beneath her. The story she'd been told, a failed assassination by an enemy family, was a lie, or at least incomplete. This was not a war. This was a betrayal. Someone inside the walls, someone the most paranoid man in New York, had trusted enough to let stand at his shoulder, had put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. And that person was almost certainly still in the house. Her mind ran the terrible arithmetic. Who benefits when the Don falls? The designated heir who inherits everything. The ambitious brother who covets the throne. Any of a dozen lieutenants with grievances. And she, Isabella, was the one person alive who could bring the only witness back to consciousness, which made her she realized with a cold plummet in her stomach. Not just a loose thread. It made her a weapon. Or a target, depending on who found out what she knew. She gathered the photographs with hands that were, she noted clinically, not quite steady, and she made her first real decision as a prisoner in the Caruso house. She would tell no one. Not Renato, whom she liked but did not trust, not the servants, and not, especially not, Matteo, because if the man who had shot his father was Matteo himself, then telling him she knew would be signing her own death warrant. And if it was not Matteo, then he was in as much danger as she was, and telling him might get them both killed before she understood the board. She would watch. She would wait. She would be, as her mother had taught her, necessary and invisible at once. She lasted 2 days. On the 11th night, she couldn't sleep. She rose, checked the Don's monitors. Stable. The pressure numbers finally trending in the right direction, a small victory that no one but she and Renato would ever know to celebrate. And then she saw that Matteo was already there. He sat in the chair beside his father's bed in the dark, his tie gone, his shirt open at the collar, a glass of something amber untouched in his hand. He was not looking at the monitors. He was looking at the old man's ruined face with an expression Isabella had never seen him wear. Not cold, not controlled, but raw. Grief and rage braided together into something that looked almost like a child's helplessness. He didn't hear her at first, and so she saw, for one unguarded moment, the man beneath the man. "You can come in," he said finally, without turning. "I know you're there. You breathe differently when you're afraid, and you're always a little afraid of me, which is sensible." Isabella stepped into the room. "I'm not afraid of you right now," she said, and was surprised to find it was true. "No?" He looked at her then, and the raw thing in his eyes was still there, not yet packed away. "Why not?" "Because a man who's afraid his father will die doesn't look at him the way you're looking at him." She sat in the chair on the other side of the bed. "He looks at him the way you're looking at him. And that's not the face of someone who wants him gone." Something passed over Matteo's features, a flicker of alarm quickly masked. "Careful, Dottoressa. You're doing a dangerous thing. You're forming opinions about who in this house is dangerous. That's a game people don't survive." "Then help me survive it." The words came out before she could stop them. "Because I've seen something, Matteo, and I don't know who I can tell, and it's eating me alive." He went very still. In the glow of the monitors, his face was all shadow and edge. "What have you seen?" She should have kept silent. Every rational cell in her body told her to keep silent. But there was something in the way he sat vigil over the wreck of his father, something she chose, in that moment, to trust, against all the evidence of her situation, and she found she could not carry the knowledge alone. "Your father wasn't shot by a rival," Isabella said quietly. "The wound is a contact wound, close range, inches. Whoever shot him was someone he trusted enough to let stand beside him." She held his gaze. "It was someone in this family, Matteo. It was someone in this house." The glass in his hand went down onto the table with a click that sounded, in the silence, like a hammer being cocked. "I know," Matteo Caruso said. "You know," Isabella repeated. The two words hung between them in the monitor-lit dark. "You've known this whole time, And you let me believe it was a rival family. I let everyone believe it was a rival family. Matteo's voice was low, controlled again, but there was a wire of tension under it now. Do you understand what happens to this organization the day it becomes known that someone inside it put a gun to the Don's head and it wasn't handled? Everything my father built stands on one thing: the certainty that betrayal is impossible, because betrayal is instantly, brutally punished. The moment that certainty cracks, every jackal from here to Sicily starts testing the walls. So yes, publicly it was a rival. Privately, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, privately, I have been trying to find out who did this before they finish the job. And before they realize that the doctor I brought in might be able to wake the one witness who saw their face. The last sentence landed on Isabella like ice water. That's why you protect me, she said slowly, not out of decency. I'm useful. I'm the key to your investigation. That's why I started protecting you. Matteo's dark eyes found hers, and for once he didn't look away, didn't retreat behind the mask. It stopped being why days ago. I'm not going to insult you by pretending otherwise, because you'd see through it, and you'd think less of me, and for reasons I don't fully understand, Dottoressa, I find I can't stand the idea of you thinking less of me. The confession sat in the air, unguarded and dangerous. Isabella felt the pull of it, felt the ground she thought she understood tilting once again. Don't, she said, but it came out soft. Don't do that. I'm your prisoner. Whatever this is, I know exactly what you are. He stood, restless, moving to the window. The lights of the sound scattered across his face. You're a woman I stole from a parking garage because a broken old man in a bed needed you. You had a life, a career you built with your own hands, an apartment, colleagues who admired you, and I erased all of it with an email and a lie. And I'd do it again, because he's my father, and I don't know how to lose the only person who ever... He stopped himself, jaw tight. It doesn't matter. It matters. Isabella rose too, drawn across the room without deciding to move. Tell me, if we're going to survive this together, and I think we are, I think that's what's happening here, then stop giving me half of yourself. Who do you suspect? For a long time he didn't answer. Then, my uncle. Of course, Vittorio, with his silk-wrapped knife of a smile, his talk of interregnums and dividing the empire. He has the motive, Isabella said. He's ambitious, he resents you, he thinks you're weak. He's careful, though. Vittorio would never pull the trigger himself. He'd never be that close, that exposed. He'd have someone do it, someone trusted, someone no one would suspect, someone with access to my father's private study where he was shot. Matteo shook his head. I've gone through every man with that access, 6 of them. I've watched them, followed them, had them followed. Nothing. Whoever did this is either better than all of them or... He broke off. Or it wasn't a man, Isabella finished quietly. Or it was someone you didn't think to put on the list. Someone invisible. A woman, a servant. Someone the most paranoid man in New York wouldn't think twice about. Matteo looked at her sharply, and she saw the idea take root, saw him turning it over, and she saw something else too, that he had never had anyone to think alongside him before. He had been alone at the centre of this, carrying it, trusting no one, and here was a stranger he'd kidnapped, seeing angles he'd missed. You think like I do, he said, almost wondering. It's disturbing. I cut open people's heads for a living, Mr. Caruso. I'm very good at figuring out where the damage is hiding. She allowed herself, for the first time, a small, dry smile. Now stop calling me Dottoressa when we're alone. If we're going to catch a would-be murderer together, we can at least use first names. Something eased in his face, not quite a smile, but the country next to one. Isabella. Matteo. They stood there in the dark, with the machines breathing for his father between them, two people who had every reason to hate each other and were instead, against all sense, becoming something like allies. Something like more. There's a condition to all of this, Matteo said abruptly, and the wall came back up, though not all the way. Something you need to know about me, so you don't misread what happens over the next weeks. I'm not free, Isabella. Whatever I feel, whatever this becomes, I'm not a free man. What do you mean? I'm engaged. The word was flat, joyless. Have been since I was 7 years old. Her name is Bianca Salerno. Her father heads an allied family, and my marriage to her is the treaty that keeps two empires from making the streets run red. It isn't a choice. It was never a choice. My father arranged it before I was old enough to know what marriage meant, and it holds together everything we are. He met her eyes. I tell you this now, in the dark, over his body, so you understand. Whatever I want, I am promised elsewhere, and in my world, a broken promise between families is a declaration of war. Men die, cities of men die, so do not, his voice roughened, do not let yourself feel anything for me, Isabella. It's the one thing in this house more dangerous than knowing who shot my father. Isabella looked at him for a long moment. Outside, a gull cried over the black water. Too late, she said softly, and did not know, until she'd said it, that it was true. Bianca Salerno arrived at the mansion 4 days later in a white Range Rover and a cloud of Tom Ford, and Isabella disliked her before she'd said a word, which shamed her because Isabella prided herself on judging people by evidence rather than instinct, and the only evidence she had was that this woman was going to marry Matteo. Bianca was beautiful in the way of women who have never once in their lives been told no. She was 26, honey blonde, poured into cream silk, with a diamond on her finger the size of a knuckle, and a smile she deployed like a weapon she'd never had to fire in earnest. She swept through the great hall, greeting servants by name, embraced Vittorio with a warmth that struck Isabella as a fraction too long, and offered Matteo a kiss on the cheek so cool it was practically clinical. Darling. Bianca's eyes slid past Matteo to Isabella, standing near the stairs in her borrowed cashmere. And who is this? You've been keeping secrets. The doctor, Matteo said, with a flatness Isabella was learning to read as a kind of protection. She's treating my father. Isabella Conti, Bianca Salerno. A lady doctor. Bianca's smile didn't waver, but her eyes did the thing that women's eyes do, the swift, total assessment, the pricing of arrival. How progressive. And you live here now, with all these men. How brave. The word brave somehow meant foolish. You must tell me everything about poor Alessandro. I've been devastated. We all have. Isabella said something polite and meaningless and watched. She had promised herself she would watch, and Bianca Salerno was worth watching. Because Bianca did not behave like a bride-to-be. She barely looked at Matteo. She did not touch him, did not seek him out, did not glance at him for reassurance the way an engaged woman glances at the man who will share her life. Her whole body seemed to orient elsewhere, and over the course of that first evening, Isabella slowly understood where. Toward Vittorio. It was nothing anyone else would notice. A hand that rested a beat too long on his sleeve, a private joke exchanged in a murmur that made Bianca laugh with genuine delight, the only genuine thing Isabella saw her do all night. The way she chose the seat beside him at dinner rather than beside her fiancé, and the way Vittorio, master of the silk-wrapped knife, went soft at the corners when she did. Isabella had spent her life reading bodies. She knew what a body looked like when it wanted another body. And Bianca Salerno's body, whenever it thought no one was watching, wanted Vittorio Caruso. Or should I ever need to have a conversation no one hears, Renato had said, showing her the blind spots in the house's surveillance. Isabella filed the observation away in the same silent vault where she kept the contact wound. She did not yet know what it meant, but she knew what it felt like the second piece of a puzzle sliding toward the first. That night, Matteo came to the sick room, as he did most nights now. It had become their ritual, the vigil over his father, the low talk in the dark, the careful electric distance between their two chairs that neither of them closed and both of them felt. "You watched her all evening," he said. "Bianca. Why?" "Because you told me to watch this house." Isabella hesitated, weighing how much to say. She decided on the truth, because the truth was the only currency that seemed to work between them. "Matteo, she doesn't love you." He let out a short, mirthless breath. "I'm aware. It's an arranged marriage, Isabella. Love was never on the schedule." "No, you don't understand. It's not that she doesn't love you, it's that she loves someone else." Isabella leaned forward. "She spent the entire night orbiting your uncle. Not the way a niece-in-law orbits a family patriarch. The way a woman orbits a man she can't keep her hands off of." Matteo went still. "That's a serious thing to say." "I know. That's why I waited until I was sure." She held his gaze. "I've watched a lot of people lie about what they feel, Matteo. Patients about their pain, families about their hope. Bianca isn't in love with you and hiding it. She's in love with Vittorio and hiding that. And if I'm right, then think about what it means. Your uncle wants the throne. Your marriage to Bianca is the treaty that props up your legitimacy as heir. But if Bianca is Vittorio's—" She let it hang. "Then the marriage isn't a treaty," Matteo said slowly, the pieces moving behind his eyes. "It's a leash. A way for Vittorio to have someone inside my house, inside my bed." His hand tightened on the arm of the chair until the knuckles whitened. "A way to watch me, control me, and, when the time is right, help him take everything." "I could be wrong," Isabella said. "I'm a surgeon, not a spy. I could be reading affection where there's only history." "You're not wrong." Matteo stood, and the coldness in him was different now. Not the flat coldness of a man who'd stopped feeling, but the focused cold of a blade being drawn. "I've felt it for years and refused to name it, because naming it meant war. My God. If Vittorio has been playing this long game, if he arranged my father's shooting and has a woman planted to marry his way into control of me, He stopped and looked at her, and the look was almost frightening in its intensity. You've done it again. You've seen the thing everyone else was too close to see. Then let me keep seeing it. Isabella rose too. Let me help you, Matteo. Not because I'm useful, because we're both trapped in the same web, and I'd rather fight than wait to be cut. He crossed the room in 2 strides, and for one heart-stopping second she thought he would kiss her, and she knew with terrible clarity that she would let him. But he stopped, inches away, close enough that she could feel the heat off his skin, and he said in a voice gone rough, "If I touch you, Isabella, I won't be able to stop. And then 2 families go to war, and you become the reason. I won't do that to you. Not yet." Then he stepped back, and the space between them roared like a wound. "Not yet," he said again, and left her burning. The nights became a country of their own. By day, the mansion was a theatre of power, Vittorio holding court in the drawing-room, capos arriving with tribute and grievance, Bianca drifting through the halls, performing the role of grieving bride-to-be, Isabella performing the role of the useful, forgettable doctor. By day, she and Matteo were strangers who nodded in passing. It was safer that way. Vittorio's eyes were everywhere, and Bianca's were sharper than she let on. But at night, when the great house sank into its own darkness, and the only sound was the sigh of the ventilator, they belonged to each other. They talked. That was the astonishing thing, how much they talked. Matteo Caruso, who, by his own admission, had trusted no one since childhood, told her things in the monitor glow that Isabella suspected he had never told a living soul. He told her about his mother, dead of cancer when he was 12, and how his father had never spoken her name again. He told her about the first time Alessandro had made him watch a punishment at 14 to teach him that mercy was a currency you spent carefully or not at all. He told her about the weight of being an heir, how he had never been allowed to want anything, only to inherit, how every friendship had been vetted for advantage, every affection weighed as leverage. "I used to think there was something wrong with me," he said one night, 3 weeks in, "that I couldn't feel things the way other people did. Cold, they call me, the Iceman, Matteo the Machine." He turned the amber glass in his hand without drinking. "Turns out I could feel things fine. I just learned early that feeling things in this world gets the things you feel taken away from you. So I stopped. It was safer to be a machine." "And now?" Isabella asked softly. His eyes came up to hers, and the whole dark room seemed to lean in. "Now there's a woman I kidnapped sitting 3 feet away from me, and every night I count the reasons I can't cross that space, and every night the list gets shorter." A muscle worked in his jaw. "That's not a machine, Isabella. That's the opposite of a machine. And it terrifies me, because the last time I let myself want something, I was 12, and I watched it die in a hospital bed." She told him things too, about her mother, the sad-mouthed, beautiful woman in the small Queen's apartment, the mysterious money that had always seemed to appear when they needed it most, the scholarships that had come through when they shouldn't have, the doors that had opened for a poor immigrant's daughter that logically should have stayed shut. "I used to think I earned it all," Isabella admitted. "The scholarship to Cornell, the residency spot everyone said was impossible. I told myself I was just that good. But sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder how a girl from nowhere with a dead mother kept getting so lucky. Matteo was watching her strangely. "What was your mother's name?" "Lucia. Lucia Conti." She smiled, a little sadly. "Why?" "No reason." But something had shifted in his face, the smallest flicker quickly hidden. He looked away at his father's sleeping ruin. Just a beautiful name. Isabella didn't press it. She was learning to read the tides of him, and something had gone out of the room, some current of unease she couldn't name. She let it go. She would remember later that she had let it go. The physical distance held for exactly 24 days. It broke on a night of storms, when the wind came howling off the Sound and rattled the tall windows, and the power flickered, and the monitors that kept Alessandro alive stuttered. For 3 seconds. 4. And Isabella lunged for the manual ventilation bag with her heart in her throat, and Matteo was there beside her instantly, and the generators caught, and the machines whirred back to life, and the crisis passed in the space of 10 seconds. But her hands were shaking, and his hands came over hers to steady them, and they were both breathing hard, close. Closer than they had ever let themselves be, and the storm was screaming outside, and the room was dark, and something that had been building for 24 days simply broke. He kissed her, or she kissed him. Afterward, neither could have said, and it didn't matter, because the moment their mouths met, the question of who had started it dissolved into the far larger fact that it was happening, that his hand was in her hair, and her fingers were fisted in his shirt, and he was kissing her like a man who had been starving and had just been shown that food existed. It was not gentle. It was 24 nights of counting reasons, all of them catching fire at once. He backed her against the wall, not roughly, but with the inevitability of gravity, and murmured her name against her mouth, like a confession, like a prayer, like a curse. "I told you," he breathed, when they broke apart to gasp. "I told you, if I touched you, I wouldn't stop." "Then don't." Her voice was not her own. Her whole careful, precise, protected life had narrowed to the heat of his body and the storm in his eyes. "Don't stop." He rested his forehead against hers, both of them trembling, and she felt the war in him, the want against the discipline, the man against the machine. "2 families," he said hoarsely. "War. You in the middle of it. I can't." "I know. I want to." His hand cupped her face like she was something breakable and holy. "God, Isabella, you don't know how much." "I know." She closed her eyes. "I know." They stood like that for a long time, foreheads together, hearts slamming, the storm raging, and his father breathing between them, wanting each other, across a chasm neither of them had made, and neither of them could cross. And in the doorway, unseen, a figure watched and smiled, and slipped away into the dark to carry the news to the one person in the house who would find it most useful of all. The next morning, Vittorio Caruso knew. Isabella saw it in the way he looked at her over breakfast, the silk gone from the knife, just for an instant, replaced by naked, appraising calculation. He knew, and Isabella understood with a sick lurch, that a report had been made, that eyes she hadn't accounted for had been in that dark room, and that whatever fragile safety she'd had as the forgettable doctor was now compromised. She said nothing. She ate her breakfast. She had learned from Matteo that the only defense against men like Vittorio was to give them nothing. But Vittorio, it turned out, was not the one who came for her. Bianca cornered her that afternoon in the conservatory, a glass room full of orchids where Isabella had taken to walking when the sick room's air grew too heavy. Bianca was radiant in ivory, and she wore the expression of a woman who has decided to enjoy herself. "You've been busy, Doctor." Bianca trailed a manicured finger along an orchid's throat. "I'll give you this, you don't waste time. 3 weeks in the house and already warming my fiancé's bed. Or is it just his study? These details matter when one is planning a wedding." Isabella's pulse spiked, but her face stayed still. "I don't know what you think you've heard." "Oh, spare me," Bianca laughed, light and vicious. "I don't care. That's what you don't understand, you clever little surgeon. I genuinely do not care whose bed Matteo warms. Rut with him in every room of this house, for all it matters to me." She stepped closer, and the mask of the grieving bride fell entirely away, revealing something harder and far more interesting beneath. "But you should care, because I know what you are. A temporary problem, a convenience. The day Alessandro wakes or dies, you're gone, one way or another, and this house closes over you like water over a stone. Matteo knows it too, so don't mistake a man's loneliness for a future, Doctor. You have no future here. You never did." It was cruel, and it was calculated to wound, and it should have wounded, except that Isabella heard, underneath the venom, the confirmation of everything she'd suspected. "I genuinely do not care whose bed Matteo warms." No woman engaged to a man like Matteo Caruso, a man who looked the way he looked and commanded the way he commanded, felt nothing at the thought of him with another woman, unless her heart was already spent elsewhere. "You're right," Isabella said quietly. "I have no future here. And you don't love him at all, do you, Bianca? You never did." She held the other woman's gaze. "So the only question worth asking is, who do you love? And what does he want from all this?" For one instant, just one, something flickered across Bianca's beautiful face. Fear. Then it was gone, sealed over with a smile. "Careful, Doctor," Bianca said, echoing Matteo's own warning in a way that made Isabella's blood run cold. "Curious women don't last long in this house. Ask Alessandro." "Oh, you can't. He's asleep." She turned to go, then paused. "The wedding is in 6 weeks, by the way. I do hope you'll have finished your little job by then. It would be so awkward to have you underfoot." That night, Matteo found her before she found him, and he was in a fury she had never seen. "Vittorio moved you," he said, low and dangerous, appearing in the sick room like a storm front. "I heard. He gave the order this afternoon. You're to be relocated to the East Wing tomorrow. Away from my father. Away from me." His hands were fists. "Do you understand what that means, Isabella? The East Wing is where his men are. It's where the cameras are all his. If he moves you there, I can't protect you. Something happens to you in the East Wing, and it's an accident, a fall, a bad heart, and I find out too late." Isabella's throat went dry. "I told you, I refuse to be moved except by you." He'll make it look like your choice, or he won't bother. He's testing me, seeing if I'll fight for you." Matteo raked a hand through his hair, and she saw beneath the fury the fear. Fear for her, which did something to her chest that no declaration could have. "If I fight for you openly, I show him you matter to me, and then you become a lever he can use. If I don't fight, he takes you, and I—" He stopped. "And you what?" He looked at her, and the machine was entirely gone. "And I lose the only thing in this house I've ever wanted for myself. And I will burn it all down before I let that happen. All of it. The families, the treaty, the throne. I mean it, Isabella. It scares me how much I mean it." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. This was a dangerous man, declaring that he would destroy empires rather than lose her. Instead, it moved through her like heat. She had spent her whole life being necessary to strangers, useful, valued for her hands and her mind, and never once, not since her mother died, had anyone looked at her and said, "You, specifically you, are the thing I would burn the world for." "Then don't let him move me," she said. "Find another way. You said Vittorio understands only strength. So be stronger. Make it impossible." Matteo looked at her for a long moment, and then something settled in him, a decision, cold and final. "You're right," he said. "There's only one way to make you untouchable in this house. Only one thing Vittorio can't override. One authority higher than mine or his." He turned toward the bed, toward the breathing ruin of his father. "The Don's personal physician cannot be moved or harmed without the Don's own word. It's law, old law from Sicily. No one touches the man or woman who holds the boss's life in their hands." "But your father's in a coma. He can't give the word." Matteo smiled, and it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had just found the blade hidden in the sheath. "No," he said, "but I can. As acting head. I'm going to name you formally before the whole family at dinner tomorrow. And once I do, Vittorio can't touch you without declaring open war on my authority. He's not ready for that. Not yet." He met her eyes. "It buys us time, but understand what it costs. The moment I stand up and claim you as mine to protect, everyone in that room will know exactly what you are to me. There's no hiding it after that. You'll be a marked woman in a different way." "Marked as what?" "As the thing Matteo Caruso would go to war for." He came close, and this time he did touch her, one hand, gentle, against her cheek. "Are you willing to be that, Isabella? Because there's no taking it back." She turned her face into his palm. "I've been necessary my whole life," she whispered. "Just once, I'd like to be wanted." He did it the next night, and Isabella would remember it for the rest of her life as the moment she stopped being a hostage and became a player. Dinner in the great dining room, the whole family convened. Vittorio at his place, smiling his silk smile, clearly expecting to watch the doctor be quietly, bloodlessly removed to the east wing, where his hands could reach her. Bianca beside him, in emerald, radiant and bored. The capos, the lieutenants, the cousins and hangers-on, and Matteo at the right hand of the empty Don's chair, calm as still water. He waited until the second course, then he stood, and the room fell silent. because when Matteo Caruso stood, rooms fell silent. "Before we eat," Matteo said, and his voice carried to every corner without rising, "there's a matter of family law to settle, and no man raises his voice to overrule it once it's spoken." He let the pause stretch. "Effective tonight, by my authority as acting head of this family while my father sleeps, Doctor, Isabella Conti is named personal physician to Don Alessandro Caruso. She holds his life in her hands. Under the old law, the law my grandfather carried from Palermo, the Don's physician is sacred. She is not to be moved, not to be touched, not to be spoken to unkindly by any member of this family, on pain of answering to me directly." The silence that followed had a texture. Isabella felt every eye in the room turn to her, some curious, some hostile, all recalculating. Vittorio's smile did not move, but his eyes did. "A generous designation, nephew," he said smoothly, "one usually reserved for men who've served the family for decades. She's been here a month." "She's kept my father alive for a month," Matteo said, "longer than 3 surgeons the city called the best. The old law doesn't care how long, it cares who holds the life." He picked up his wine. "Or do you object, uncle? Do you have some reason to want the Don's physician unprotected?" It was a beautiful trap, and Isabella watched Vittorio see the walls of it close around him. To object was to declare he wanted Alessandro's doctor vulnerable, which, in a family built on the sanctity of the boss's life, was a step from treason. Vittorio was too clever to take the bait. "Of course not," Vittorio said, spreading his hands, all warmth again. "I only note the honour. To the doctor, then." He raised his glass. "May she keep my brother very well indeed." The family drank. And Isabella understood that she had just been made both safe and infinitely more dangerous, because now everyone knew that the cold, machine-hearted heir had drawn a circle of protection around a stranger, and in this world, men did that for only one kind of woman. Across the table, Bianca watched Isabella over the rim of her glass with an expression that was almost admiration. And beside her, Vittorio's hand found Bianca's beneath the table, a small, private squeeze, invisible to everyone but the surgeon trained to notice exactly such things. "I see you," Isabella thought. "I see both of you." Later, on the terrace, Matteo found her. "It's done," he said. "You're safe. As safe as anyone gets in this house." "You realize what you did in there?" Isabella wrapped her arms around herself against the sea wind. "You told them. All of them. There's no going back to being invisible now." "No." He came to stand beside her at the balustrade, close, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "There isn't." "Why?" She turned to look at him. Really look. The way she looked at scans, trying to see the truth beneath the surface. "You could have found another way. Something quieter. You didn't have to stand up in front of your whole family and paint a target on your own back for me. Why did you do it that way?" Matteo was quiet for a moment, watching the lights of a distant tanker crawl across the black horizon. "Because I'm tired of being a machine," he said finally. "Because for 20 years I've made every decision by calculating advantage, and tonight, for once, I made one because I couldn't stand the thought of you in the East Wing, where I couldn't reach you." He turned to face her. "And because a part of me, a part I don't understand and can't control, wanted them to know, wanted to say it out loud, that you're mine to protect, that I chose you. His jaw tightened. It's the most reckless thing I've done in my adult life, and I'd do it again tomorrow. The wind pulled a strand of hair loose from Isabella's pins, and Matteo, without seeming to decide to, reached out and tucked it back behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her jaw. The touch went through her like current. "You keep saying, 'not yet,'" Isabella whispered. "The kiss, the night of the storm. You keep pulling back. When, Matteo? When does 'not yet' end?" His hand cupped her face, and his thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, and his eyes were black and burning in the dark. "When I've untangled the trap we're both standing in, when I know who shot my father, and I've cut Vittorio and his planted bride out of this family root and branch, and I've broken an engagement that could start a war, and I've made it so that being with me doesn't get you killed." He leaned his forehead against hers, the way he had in the storm. "I won't have you as a stolen thing in the dark, Isabella. I won't have you as a secret I feel guilty for. When I finally cross this space between us, and God help me, I'm going to, I want it to be clean. I want to be free, and I want you free, and I want the whole rotten world to know that I chose you in the daylight, not just in a sick room at 3 a.m. Isabella's eyes stung. No one had ever offered her the daylight. Every good thing in her life had come to her in secret: the mysterious money, the doors that opened without explanation, the sense all her life of being watched over by an invisible hand she'd never questioned. She had grown so used to being a secret that Matteo's promise of the daylight cracked something open in her chest. "That's a lot of impossible things," she breathed. "The war, the engagement, your uncle, finding a shooter no one can find." "I know. And if you can't do them all, then I do them anyway." His mouth was inches from hers. "I told you, I'll burn it down before I lose you. I've never wanted anything in 35 years, Isabella. Now I want everything, and I want it with you. And a man who wants nothing is dangerous. But a man who finally wants something—" His voice dropped to almost nothing. "That man is the most dangerous thing in the world." They didn't kiss. He held to his "not yet" by a thread Isabella could feel fraying. But he took her hand in the dark, and he held it, and they stood together at the edge of the black water, while the great dangerous house slept behind them, two people wanting each other across a chasm they had both sworn to close. And somewhere in that house, in a room where the cameras belonged to him, Vittorio Caruso poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to a honey-blonde woman in emerald and said softly, "The boy's in love. Good. Loved men make mistakes. Now we only have to decide how to use her." And Bianca Salerno smiled and drank and said, "Let me handle the doctor. Women tell each other things, and when the time comes—" She touched the place on her thigh where, Isabella would one day learn, she kept a small pearl-handled gun. "I've never minded doing the wet work myself." Isabella began to investigate in earnest, and she did it the only way she knew how, methodically, the way she'd work up a difficult diagnosis, gathering data before forming a conclusion. Renato was her first instrument. The old, unlicensed doctor knew the house's rhythms, its history, its buried things. Over the antiseptic-smelling hours of the Don's care, she drew him out. "The night Alessandro was shot," she said, one afternoon, adjusting an IV line. "You were here?" "In the house, yes. Not near the study." Renato's tremor was quiet today. "I heard the shot. One shot. I was the first medical hands on him. I stopped the bleeding, kept him alive until Matteo's people brought the surgeons." He glanced at her. "Why do you ask, Dottoressa? The wound tells you something?" "I've watched you look at those photographs like they're speaking to you." She decided to trust him a little further. "Close range," she said quietly. "Contact wound. Whoever shot him was standing beside him. It wasn't a rival." Renato didn't look surprised, which told her something. "I know," he said. "I've known since I saw the stippling. I said nothing because saying something in this house gets a man killed." He met her eyes. "You should say nothing too." Who was in the house that night, Renato? Who could get close to him in his private study? The old man was quiet for a long time. Then he set down his instruments and spoke very low in Italian, where the cameras couldn't hear and few in the house would understand the rapid Sicilian. "The study is sacred. Alessandro let almost no one in. His son, his brother, his consigliere, old Genovese, who since died of a heart attack. Convenient, that. A handful of trusted men." He paused. "And the women who cleaned it. And the girl." "What girl?" "Bianca Salerno." Renato's mouth thinned. "She came often that month, before the shooting. To discuss the wedding," she said. "Alessandro was arranging it. His last great project, tying the families together through the boy's marriage. She had free run of the house. She sat with Alessandro in his study more than once, being charming, being the daughter he never had." He shook his head. A pretty girl asking an old man's advice about flowers and dresses. Who would think twice? Isabella's blood went cold and clear. Who would think twice? The most paranoid man in New York, letting a sweet young bride-to-be sit beside him in his sanctum, close enough to touch, close enough to press a gun to his head before he understood what was in her hand. "You think it was her?" Isabella said. "I think," Renato said carefully, "that I am an old man who wants to die of natural causes, and that you should be very, very careful what you think out loud." He resumed his work. "But if I were a younger man, Dottoressa, and I wanted to know the truth, I would want to find the gun. A contact wound like that from a small weapon held close. Not the kind of gun a soldier carries, the kind a woman keeps. And I would want to know why 3 days after the shooting, one of the housemaids swears she saw the Salerno girl burning something in the garden incinerator at dawn, and was told by Signor Vittorio's man that she'd seen nothing at all, and given an envelope thick enough to buy her silence. Isabella brought it to Matteo that night, all of it, laid out like findings. He listened without interrupting, his face growing colder and stiller with each fact, until by the end he looked less like a man and more like something carved. "Bianca," he said finally, "you think Bianca shot my father?" "I think the evidence points there. Contact wound. She had access. She had motive if she's Vittorio's, a shooting that could be blamed on rivals, that removes the Don and clears Vittorio's path, while Bianca's marriage to you keeps you docile and legitimate until they're ready to cut you out too." Isabella spread her hands. But it's circumstantial, Matteo. A wound pattern, an affair I've read off body language, a maid who saw something burning. It wouldn't convince a jury, and it won't convince your family. My family doesn't need a jury. Matteo's voice was terrible in its calm. My family needs certainty. In our world, you don't execute on suspicion. Do that, and you become the thing everyone fears, and they turn on you. You need proof. Proof the whole family accepts, or the purge starts a civil war. He stood, moving to the window, and Isabella watched the weight of it settle on his shoulders. If I accuse Vittorio and Bianca, and I'm wrong, or right but can't prove it, I fracture the family and hand my enemies the excuse to destroy me. If I do nothing, they finish what they started. My father wakes, and they kill him properly this time, or they kill me, or both. Then get proof. There's only one source of proof that no one can argue with. Matteo turned, and his eyes went slowly to the bed, to the breathing, silver-haired ruin of the man who had ruled New York from the shadows. Him, Matteo said. My father saw who shot him. He's the only witness who can name the shooter with an authority no capo will question. If he wakes and he speaks. He stopped. And Isabella understood then the shape of the impossible thing coming toward them both, because she was the one who controlled whether Alessandro Caruso woke. She was the hand on that particular door. And the man she was falling in love with had just told her, without saying it, that everything, his life, his throne, her safety, the future they'd sworn to reach, depended on her waking a patient who might, when he opened his eyes, name a killer. And if I wake him, Isabella said slowly, and he names the shooter, and it clears you, then we win. But if I wake him, she went on, her voice not quite steady, and he names someone you love, or someone whose fall destroys you. I've done it. I've spoken it into the world. There's no unsaying what a dying witness says. She looked at him. You're asking me to gamble your life on the memory of a man with a bullet in his brain. I don't even know if he can remember, Matteo. Brain injury does things to memory. He might wake with no recollection of the shooting at all. He might wake and name the wrong person out of confusion. He might wake and die within the hour, having said nothing. Matteo crossed to her and took her hands, and his were cold. Then it's the most dangerous surgery you'll ever perform, he said. Not with a scalpel, with the truth. He pressed her knuckles to his lips. How close is he, Isabella, to waking? She thought of the numbers, the trending pressures, the flicker of response she'd seen that morning and told no one about. Close, she admitted. Days, maybe a week. She swallowed. The window is opening, Matteo, and once it opens, I have to make a choice, and I'm terrified of what waking him might cost us both. The first sign came on a grey Tuesday, and it nearly stopped Isabella's heart. She was doing her morning assessment, the ritual she'd performed 100 times, penlight, reflexes, the whispered coaxing she used with all her comatose patients, as though somewhere in the dark they could hear. "Come on, Don Caruso," she murmured, thumbing back an eyelid. "Show me something. Anyone home?" And the eye tracked the light, just for a moment, a fraction of a second, but the pupil constricted and the eye moved deliberately, following the beam, not the blank, reflexive response of deep coma, but the purposeful flicker of a mind swimming up toward the surface. Isabella's breath caught. She tested again. Again the tracking, weaker now, the patient sinking back down, but unmistakable. He was surfacing. The window she'd told Matteo about had begun to open. She stood there with the penlight trembling in her hand and felt the full, monstrous weight of her position descend. For weeks it had been abstract. When he wakes, if he wakes. Now it was real. Alessandro Caruso was climbing back toward the light, and when he reached it, he would open his mouth, and one of two things would happen. He would name the person who shot him, or he would not. And Isabella, alone among everyone in this house of killers, held the power to open that door or hold it shut. Because that was the terrible truth she'd been circling. She could hold it shut. A slight increase in sedation, an adjustment to the medications managing his pressure, a dozen small, defensible medical choices that would keep Alessandro Caruso safely, deniably asleep. Perhaps forever. No one in this house had the knowledge to catch her. Renato, maybe, but Renato had made it clear he wanted only to survive. She could keep the dawn in the twilight and protect Matteo from whatever the old man might say, and no one would ever know she'd made the choice. It would be a betrayal of everything she was, every oath, every principle, the entire architecture of the self she'd built since she was a poor girl in Queens who decided to be necessary and good and beyond reproach. And she was, God help her, actually considering it. She didn't tell Matteo that day. She needed to think. She walked the grounds. She was allowed that now, within the seawall, always watched. And she tried to reason her way through it, the way she reasoned through everything. And for the first time in her life, reason failed her. Because the equation had love in it, and love is not a variable that solves cleanly. Wake him. Ethical, honest, true to who I am. But if he names Matteo, if it was Matteo all along, if this whole tender, impossible thing between us is a lie built to keep his father's doctor loyal, then I've destroyed the man I love with my own hands. And I've done it in a house full of people who will then have no reason to keep me alive. Keep him under. A betrayal of my oath, a slow murder by inaction, a crime that makes me one of them. But it protects Matteo. It protects us. It buys time. She thought about her mother. Learn to be necessary, Bella. But her mother had also, in her gentle, sad-mouthed way, taught her other things. To be honest, to be good, to be the kind of person who could look at herself in the mirror. Lucia Conti had raised a daughter with a spine of principle, and now that daughter stood on a manicured lawn on Long Island, contemplating medical murder for love. That evening, Matteo found her before she'd decided anything. "Something's changed," he said, reading her face the way he'd learnt to. "In you, since this morning. What is it?" She couldn't lie to him. That was the thing she'd discovered about loving him. She could keep secrets from the whole world, but not from him. "He tracked the light this morning," she said quietly. "Your father. He followed the penlight with his eyes. Purposefully." She watched the news land. "He's surfacing, Matteo. The window is open. If I do nothing to prevent it, he could regain consciousness within days." Matteo went very still. She saw hope and terror war across his face in equal measure, the son who wanted his father back, the heir who feared what his father might say. "And if you did do something to prevent it," he asked very low, "could you keep him under?" The fact that he asked told her he'd thought of it too. Of course he had. He was a Caruso. He'd been raised to think of every advantage, every lever. Yes, Isabella said. I could, easily, and no one would ever know. The words sat between them, poisonous and tempting. Matteo was silent for a long moment. Isabella watched him wrestle with it, watched the machine in him run the cold calculation, watched the man in him recoil from it, and she found she was holding her breath, because whatever he said next would tell her who he really was. No, Matteo said finally. His voice was rough. No. Wake him. Isabella blinked. Matteo, you think I don't know what you're offering me? He took her by the shoulders, and his eyes blazed. You'd break yourself for me. You'd become something you despise, carry it the rest of your life, murder a man by inches in the dark, to protect me from whatever he might say. And God help me, Isabella, there's a part of me so selfish it wants to let you. His grip tightened. But I won't, because if I let you do that, I turn the one clean thing in my whole rotten life into something as dirty as everything else. I turn you into a Caruso, and I'd rather lose the throne. I'd rather lose everything. He pressed his forehead to hers. Wake him, whatever he says. Even if he names me and Isabella, I swear on my mother's grave I did not shoot my father. But I know you can't be sure of that. I know all you have is my word. Even if he names me, wake him. Be who you are. Don't let this house take that from you too. Isabella's eyes filled. In a house of liars and killers, the most dangerous man in New York had just told her to do the honest thing, even if it destroyed him. You could be signing your own death warrant, she whispered. Then I'll die a man who didn't ask the woman he loves to become a murderer. His thumb wiped a tear from her cheek. That's a better death than most Carusos get. You said you loved me, she breathed. It was the first time either of them had used the word. Matteo went still. Then, quietly, like a man laying down a weapon, I did. I do. I have for weeks. It's the truest thing I've ever said. He kissed her forehead. Now wake my father, Isabella, and let's find out together what kind of world we're waking into. Isabella made her choice, and having made it, she did what she always did. She executed with precision. Over the next 3 days, she carefully, deliberately brought Alessandro Caruso toward the surface. She weaned the sedation. She optimized every parameter. She spoke to him for hours. Her voice, Matteo's voice, the anchors that might guide a lost mind home. Renato assisted, saying nothing, understanding everything. And she prepared, because a mind surfacing from that deep can crash on the rocks of waking, and she meant to lose no patient she had fought this hard to keep. She also prepared for the other thing, because she was not naive. The moment Alessandro Caruso opened his eyes and could speak, he became the most dangerous object in New York, a witness who could name a traitor, reshape a succession, end lives. And the people who had shot him would want, very badly, for him never to speak at all. When he wakes, she told Matteo, the danger to him triples. If Vittorio and Bianca shot him to silence him, an awake Don is the one thing they can't allow. They'll try to finish it. I know. Matteo had quietly doubled the guard. His own men, the ones he trusted, stationed at the sick room around the clock. No one gets to him but you, me, and Renato. No one. But even Matteo could not seal the house completely, and he did not yet fully grasp what Isabella had begun to suspect, that the danger was not a man with a gun who would try to break in. The danger was already inside. The danger was sweet and blonde, and had free run of the mansion, and had killed once at close range, and, by her own languid admission, did not mind doing the wet work herself. Alessandro Caruso woke on the fourth day at 4:11 in the morning, with the sea going grey outside the windows. Isabella was there. She had barely slept in days, dozing in the chair, and she came awake to the sound of the machines changing their rhythm, and then to something she had prayed for and dreaded, a low, cracked, human groan. His eyes were open, confused, unfocused, the eyes of a man who had been away a long time, but open and aware and searching the room. Don Caruso. Isabella was at his side instantly, her voice gentle, professional, the voice she'd used for 100 wakings. You're safe. You're home. You've been very ill. My name is Isabella. I'm your doctor. Don't try to talk yet. Just breathe. You're safe. His eyes found her face, fixed on it, and something happened that she would not understand until much later. His ruined face changed, softened, filled with a recognition that made no sense, because they had never met. His cracked lips moved, a whisper, barely air. Lucia, Alessandro Caruso breathed, staring at Isabella with wet, wondering eyes. Lucia. Her mother's name. Isabella went cold to her core. No, she said softly, thrown. No, I'm Isabella, your doctor. You're confused. It's normal. Don't worry. But he kept staring at her as though she were a ghost, as though she were someone he'd loved and lost, his hand twitching toward her face, and something in Isabella's chest cracked open along a seam she hadn't known was there. She didn't have time to understand it. Because that was the moment Matteo came through the door, summoned by the changing monitors, and behind him, drawn by the sudden movement in the sleeping house, came others. Renato, 2 of Matteo's guards, and, gliding in from the shadows of the hall where she had apparently been waiting, watching for exactly this, Bianca Salerno, in a silk robe, her honey hair loose, her face arranged into concern. "He's awake?" Bianca breathed, pressing to the front. "Oh, thank God. Thank God, Alessandro. We've all been so—" And Alessandro Caruso's eyes moved from Isabella's face to Bianca's, and the wonder drained out of them, replaced by something else entirely, recognition of a different kind. Terror. Rage. His whole body seized, the monitors shrilling, his shaking hand rising to point one trembling finger directly at the beautiful blonde woman in the doorway, and from his ruined throat came a single word, cracked and clear and damning. Lei. Her. The room froze. Everyone understood. Bianca's face, for one unguarded instant, showed the truth, the flash of pure animal panic, before she could mask it. "He's delirious," Bianca said quickly, too quickly. "Brain damage. He doesn't know what he's saying." "Lei," Alessandro rasped again, the finger not wavering, his eyes burning into hers. Tu mi hai sparato." You shot me. And then several things happened at once. Bianca's hand went to the pocket of her silk robe. Isabella saw it, saw the pearl-handled gun come up, small and lethal, saw Bianca's beautiful face harden into the mask of the killer she truly was, saw the barrel swing towards the bed to finish what she'd started, to silence the witness before the words could take root. "Matteo!" Isabella screamed, and threw herself across Alessandro's body. The gun cracked, but Matteo was already moving, faster than Isabella had known a person could move. The cold machine transformed into pure violent purpose, and his hand closed over Bianca's wrist and wrenched it upward so the shot went wild into the ceiling, plaster raining down. And then he had the gun, and Bianca was screaming, and the guards were on her, and Alessandro Caruso was weeping and rasping his accusation over and over. Lei, tu mi hai sparato. And Isabella was shielding her patient with her own body, and the whole rotten secret of the Caruso house had finally, violently, been dragged into the light. Matteo stood over the pinned, shrieking Bianca with her own gun in his hand and murder in his eyes, and his voice, when it came, was the coldest thing Isabella had ever heard. "Bianca Salerno," he said, "you shot my father." He looked up, and his gaze swept the gathering household, the woken servants, the arriving men. In front of witnesses, in front of the Don himself, who names you with his own mouth. His jaw tightened. The only question left, and here his eyes went hard as the sea in winter, is who gave the order. Because you didn't do this alone, Bianca, and we both know whose bed you crawl into at night. Bianca, pinned and panting, her mask entirely gone now, looked up at Matteo with pure venom. "You'll never prove it," she spat, "and even if you do, you think you can move against him? He owns half this family. You touch him, you die, and your little Dr. Whore dies with you." "Try me," Matteo Caruso said softly. And somewhere in the great house an alarm began to ring. The alarm was Vittorio's doing, though it took an hour of chaos to understand it. The moment Bianca had been seized, someone loyal to Vittorio had tripped the house's security alert, a signal, Matteo realized too late, meant to summon Vittorio's own men and to sow the confusion Vittorio would need to control the story. Because that was the thing about Vittorio Caruso, he never fought a battle he hadn't already prepared the ground for. By the time the household had assembled in the great hall, dawn breaking cold through the tall windows, Vittorio had arrived, dressed, composed, radiating the wounded authority of an elder statesman, and he had already begun with terrifying skill to turn the disaster to his advantage. "My niece-to-be, a shooter?" Vittorio's voice filled the hall, incredulous, grave. "The girl is clearly unwell, hysterical, and my brother, God love him, wakes from a coma with brain damage and points at the first frightened girl he sees." He shook his silver head sadly. "But let us suppose it's true. Let us suppose Bianca did this terrible thing. Then we must ask, why? Who benefits? Who has been alone with my sleeping brother night after night for months? Who controls his every medication, his every breath?" His eyes swung slow and deadly to Isabella. The stranger, the kidnapped doctor, The woman my nephew is so besotted with that he named her sacred and cannot see straight. Who is to say the doctor and the girl did not conspire? Who is to say the doctor did not coach my poor brother to point where she wished? It was masterful. Isabella felt the mood of the room shift, felt the suspicion turn toward her like a compass needle. Vittorio was doing exactly what a cornered predator does. He was not defending Bianca. He was sacrificing her, folding her into a larger lie that turned the accusation back on Isabella and, through Isabella, onto Matteo's judgment. "That's a lie," Isabella said, and her voice rang clearer than she'd expected. "The Don named her the second he saw her, before I said a word. And the wound that put him in that coma was a contact wound, close range, fired by someone standing beside him, someone he trusted. Not a rival, a member of this household." She looked around the hall at the hard faces of the capos. "I have the photographs, the forensics. Bianca had access to his private study in the weeks before the shooting. Ask your own maids. She burned evidence in the garden incinerator 3 days after, and one of your people paid a witness to forget it." She turned her gaze on Vittorio. "One of your people, Signor Caruso." The hall murmured. Vittorio's smile flickered. "The doctor is well coached indeed," he said smoothly. "Forensics, trajectories. How convenient that the only person who can interpret this evidence is the outsider who—" "Enough!" Matteo did not shout. He never shouted. But the single word cut through the hall like a blade, and the room fell silent. He stepped forward, and Bianca's pearl-handled gun was still in his hand, and his face was the face of a man who had stopped calculating and started deciding. "My father is awake. He is the Don. Not you, uncle. Not me. Him. And he has named his shooter with his own mouth in front of a dozen witnesses, and then that shooter drew a weapon and tried to finish the job in front of those same witnesses. He let it land. There is no story to spin here. There is only what everyone in this room saw with their own eyes. Bianca Salerno shot Don Alessandro Caruso. She just tried to shoot him again. That is not delirium. That is not the doctor's coaching. That is a fact, sealed in the Don's blood. He turned slowly, taking in the whole assembly. "And a woman does not shoot the head of the Caruso family alone," Matteo went on. "She was placed. She was directed. She was promised something worth the risk of her own life. So I ask you all, as men who have sworn loyalty to my father and to his blood, do we accept that a 26-year-old girl conceived and executed the assassination of the most powerful man in New York entirely on her own for no reason? Or do we ask who she loves, who she answers to, whose bed she warms while she wears my ring?" The silence was total. Every eye in the hall slowly, inexorably drifted toward Vittorio. And Isabella watched the master strategist realize that his own nephew had just done to him exactly what he'd tried to do to Isabella, reframed the whole story, turned the room, and left him standing exposed in the light of a question he could not answer. "You dare," Vittorio said softly, and now the silk was entirely gone from the knife. "You dare accuse me, your own uncle, your father's brother, I dare, Matteo said, to ask a question. Answer it then, in front of everyone. Are you Bianca Salerno's lover, uncle? Have you been sharing the bed of the woman engaged to your nephew? The woman who just tried to murder your brother? Vittorio's jaw worked, and in that hesitation, that fatal, telling hesitation, Isabella saw the whole family see the truth. This is absurd, Vittorio said at last, but it was too late, and he knew it. I won't dignify. Then let's ask Bianca, Matteo said, and turned to where the blonde woman knelt, pinned between two guards. Bianca, you're going to die today. We both know that. The only question is whether you die alone, taking the fall for a man who used you, or whether you die having told the truth. So tell them. Who gave the order? Whose bed? Whose plan? And Bianca Salerno, beautiful, ruined, furious, and utterly abandoned by the man she'd killed for, looked up at Vittorio Caruso, who would not meet her eyes, who was already edging toward the door, already calculating his escape. And Isabella watched love curdle into hatred on the blonde woman's face in real time. He promised me everything, Bianca said, her voice cracking, her eyes never leaving Vittorio. He said once Alessandro was gone and Matteo was blamed for it, we'd rule together. That's why I did it. That's why I shot the old man and left the gun to point at Matteo. It was supposed to be Matteo they blamed. She laughed, a terrible broken sound. The whole thing. Framing Matteo for his own father's murder. That was the plan. His plan. Her finger rose, trembling, to point at the silver-haired man in the doorway. Vittorio Caruso. It was all Vittorio. And now he's going to leave me to die for it. The hall erupted. Vittorio Caruso did not die that morning because Vittorio Caruso had never in his life walked into a room without an exit. As the hall erupted, capos shouting, Matteo's men and Vittorio's men suddenly eyeing each other with hands drifting toward jackets, the fragile unity of the family cracking down its old fault line, Vittorio simply stepped backward through the door. And it turned out there were 6 armed men in the hallway behind him, men who had come in with the alarm, men whose loyalty he had bought years ago, against exactly this day. Consider carefully, Vittorio said from the doorway, his composure a terrifying thing to witness. Half the guns in this house answer to me. My brother is a vegetable who will be dead within the month, regardless of what the doctor pretends. My nephew is a boy who has let his heart make his decisions. You all saw it. The sacred doctor, the broken engagement, the war he's about to start with the Salernos over a girl. Is that who you want to follow? A lovesick child? His eyes swept the capos, cold and reasonable. Bianca is mad and will say anything. There is no proof of anything but a girl's raving. Go home, sleep. And in the morning, when heads are cool, we will discuss the future of this family like men. My door is open to any who wish to discuss it sooner. And then he was gone, retreating behind his 6 guns, out into the breaking dawn, and Isabella heard cars starting on the gravel drive, and understood that the war Matteo had been trying to avoid for 3 months had just formally begun. But not everyone left with Vittorio. That was the thing Isabella watched with her diagnostician's eye. She watched the family split. Perhaps half the capos drifted out after Vittorio, calculating that the ambitious brother with the guns was the safer bet than the lovesick heir. But half stayed near Matteo, stayed near the woken Don. Because Alessandro Caruso, even broken, even rasping, was still the man they'd sworn to, and a witness's naked accusation is a hard thing for honourable killers to walk away from. "He'll consolidate," Matteo said grimly an hour later in the war council that formed in the Don's study, the very room where his father had been shot. "By nightfall, he'll have half the family and every man he's bought. He'll frame it as protecting the family from my poor judgment, and he'll come for us. For my father, to silence him properly this time. For me, to remove the rival. And for you," his eyes found Isabella, "because you're the one who woke the witness, and because hurting you hurts me, and Vittorio has just learned that I have a weakness he can exploit." "Then we move first," said one of the loyal capos, a scarred, heavy man named Sal, who had served Alessandro 30 years. "You're the heir, Matteo. The Don named you, and now the Don's named the traitor. We have the right. We have the law. We just don't have the numbers. Not yet." "Then we get the numbers." Matteo's mind was working fast, cold, brilliant. Vittorio's strength is the men he's bought. But bought men are only loyal to a winner. The moment they smell that Vittorio's going to lose, the moment they see the Don alive and lucid and pointing, half of them come back. Loyalty in this family flows to strength and legitimacy, and I have both, if I move right. He looked at Sal. "I need my father seen, alive, awake, naming the traitor, not rumours, seen, by the capos who are wavering. That breaks Vittorio's story that he's a vegetable. Which means keeping him alive and lucid," Isabella said quietly, "through what's about to be a war. In a house Vittorio may attack." She met Matteo's eyes. "Matteo, I can keep him medically stable, but I can't do it in a firefight. If bullets start flying through this house, my patient, the one witness who can win this for you, dies in the crossfire, and everything Bianca just confessed becomes a mad girl's raving, exactly like Vittorio said." The room absorbed this. It was Matteo who saw the answer. "Then we move him," he said, "somewhere Vittorio can't reach, somewhere I control completely." He was already pulling out his phone. "The penthouse, Manhattan, my own building, my men, my floor, private medical suite, better than half the hospitals in the city. Vittorio has no access. We move my father, we move you, we move the loyal men, and we make our stand from a fortress in the sky instead of a house full of Vittorio's ghosts." He looked at Isabella. "Can he survive the transport?" Isabella ran the calculation, the risk of moving a freshly woken brain injury patient against the certainty of leaving him in a house about to become a battlefield. "With the right equipment and me in the ambulance, yes. It's a risk, but staying is a bigger one." "Then we go tonight." Matteo turned to the room, quietly, before Vittorio finishes counting his guns. "Sal, the loyal men and only the loyal men. Renato, pack the medical suite. Isabella," his voice gentled just slightly, just for her, "keep him alive. Everything depends on it now. My father is the only weapon in the world that can end this without a bloodbath." As the room emptied into frantic motion, Matteo caught Isabella's hand and drew her aside, into the cold grey light of the window. "There's something else," he said, low. Something I have to ask you, and I hate that I have to ask it now, in the middle of all this, but it's been eating at me since the night you told me your mother's name. His eyes searched hers. When my father woke, the first thing he said, before he pointed at Bianca, "Do you remember?" Isabella's stomach dropped. She had been trying not to remember. "He called me Lucia," she whispered. "My mother's name. I thought he was confused." "My father is many things," Matteo said quietly, "but the way he looked at you was not confusion. It was recognition." He hesitated. "Isabella, how did a poor girl from Queens with a dead mother get every door in the world to open for her? The scholarships, the money that appeared, the impossible residency." He watched her face go pale as she heard him say aloud the very questions she'd whispered to him weeks ago. What if it wasn't luck? What if someone was watching over you, protecting you? Someone with the power to open any door in New York. Isabella couldn't breathe. "Matteo, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," he said gently, terribly, "that I think my father knew your mother. I think he loved her, and I think we need to find out, before this goes any further between us, exactly what that makes you to him, and exactly what that makes you to me." They moved him at 2 a.m., a convoy of 3 ambulances and 6 vehicles racing off Long Island in the dark, and by the time the sun rose, Isabella was standing at a wall of glass 60 floors above Manhattan, watching the city she'd been stolen from glitter beneath her like a spill of jewels. The penthouse was a different kind of fortress than the mansion, vertical instead of sprawling, sleek black stone and glass and steel, a single private elevator the only way in, guarded by men who answered to Matteo and no one else. The medical suite occupied an entire wing, better equipped than Isabella had dared hope, and there she installed Alessandro Caruso, stable, breathing on his own now, drifting in and out of a lucidity that broke her heart with its fragility. Because in the hours since the waking, Isabella had come to know her patient as a person, and it was undoing her. Alessandro Caruso, awake, was not the monster she'd braced for. He was old and frightened and grieving, and when he was lucid, he watched her with those wet, wondering eyes and called her Lucia and reached for her hand, and Isabella, who had spent her life keeping professional distance from patients, found she could not pull away. "You have her hands," he rasped one afternoon when it was just the two of them, his voice returning by degrees. "Lucia's hands, long fingers. A surgeon's hands, I always said she should have been. But there was no money, no chance for a girl like her in those days." His eyes filled. "So I made sure her daughter had the chance. I made sure. You were never supposed to know. It was the one clean thing I ever did, watching over you from far away. The one thing I did that wasn't stained." Isabella's hands stilled on his IV line. "You knew my mother," she said carefully. "Lucia Conti. I loved your mother." The old Don's voice cracked. "Before all this, before I was who I became. She was 17, I was 20, and she was the most beautiful thing I ever saw. And I would have married her." His face twisted with an ancient grief. "But my father had other plans for me. A marriage, an alliance, the family. And Lucia. Lucia was too good to be a mob wife, too good for this life, and she knew it before I did. She left me, vanished, raised her daughter alone, wanted nothing from me, wanted her girl kept clean of all this. A tear tracked down into the white stubble. I respected it. For years I respected it. I only watched from the shadows, opened a door here, a door there, made sure my Lucia's girl wanted for nothing, achieved everything, never knew where the wind at her back came from. He gripped Isabella's hand with surprising strength. And now here you are, grown, brilliant, a surgeon, the thing your mother should have been, and you saved my life. He wept openly now. You saved my life, and you don't even know... Know what? Isabella's own voice was barely a whisper. Her heart was slamming. She thought of Matteo's terrible, gentle questions. Exactly what that makes you to him. Exactly what that makes you to me. Don't even know what, Alessandro. But the old man's lucidity was failing, sliding, the injured brain unable to hold the thread, and his eyes were fluttering closed, and the last thing he murmured before he drifted back down was, "How long I loved her. Before you were born. Right before. The timing, Isabella. Nobody ever knew the timing, but Lucia and me." And then he was asleep, and Isabella was standing in a glass tower over Manhattan, with her whole world tilting on its axis, because she understood now exactly what he was almost saying. Before you were born. Right before. Her mother had left Alessandro Caruso, and some months later, Isabella had never known exactly how many. Her mother had always been vague about her father. "He's gone, Bella. He was never really here." Some months later, Isabella had been born. If the timing was close enough, if her mother had left already pregnant, then the man in the bed was not just her mother's lost love. He might be her father. And if Alessandro Caruso was her father, then Matteo Caruso, his nephew, the man she loved, the man whose bed she had almost fallen into a dozen times in 3 months of long, dark nights, was her cousin. Isabella made it to the bathroom before she was sick. Matteo found her there, on the floor of the marble bathroom, shaking. "Isabella." He was on his knees beside her instantly, all the coldness gone, just fear. "What happened? Is it my father? Did he... He might be my father." The words came out of her in a rush, jagged, horrible. "Matteo, he loved my mother. He watched over me my whole life. The scholarships, the money, all of it. It was him. And the timing. He said the timing, right before I was born. And if he's my..." She couldn't finish. She looked up at him with wild, stricken eyes. "Then what are we? What have we been doing? What almost..." Matteo went white. She watched the same arithmetic she'd just done rip through him, watched the horror of it land. "No," he said. "No, that's not... You said it yourself, last night. You told me we needed to find out what I am to him and what I am to you." Isabella pressed the heels of her hands to her eyes. "Well, now we know what to be afraid of. If he's my father, you're my cousin, Matteo. And every night in that sick room, everything we felt, everything we almost..." A sob tore out of her. "It's obscene. It's a nightmare. I can't..." "Stop." Matteo took her face in both hands, forcing her to look at him. His own eyes were wild, but his voice was iron. "We don't know that. We don't know, Isabella. A dying man's rambling, timing he half remembers through brain damage, that's not proof of anything. It's a fear, not a fact. His thumbs wiped at her tears, and I am not going to let a fear destroy the only good thing either of us has ever had. Not without knowing. Do you understand me? We find out. The real way. The certain way. How? She whispered. The same way you'd diagnose anything. His forehead came down against hers, both of them trembling on the cold marble floor. Evidence. Certainty. A test. He drew a breath. A DNA test, Isabella. His and yours. We find out for certain whether Alessandro Caruso is your father. And until we know, his voice broke just slightly, until we know, I won't touch you. Not because I don't want to. God, because I want to more than I want to breathe, but because if it turns out I'm holding my own blood in my arms, I need to be able to live with what came before, and I can barely live with it now. Isabella clung to him on the bathroom floor, and outside the glass walls Manhattan glittered, indifferent, and somewhere across the water Vittorio Caruso was counting his guns. They drew the samples that night, in secret, and sent them by courier to a private lab that owed Matteo a favour and asked no questions. 48 hours, the lab said. 48 hours to learn whether Isabella Conti was the daughter of a mob boss, and whether the love that had grown in the dark was a blessing or an abomination. 48 hours in the middle of a war, because the war would not wait for their private agony. Vittorio Caruso moved with the ruthless efficiency of a man who'd planned this for years. By the second day, word came up through Sal and the loyal men. Vittorio had claimed the mansion, declared himself acting head in light of the Don's incapacity and the heir's compromised judgment, and begun the patient work of turning the family. He'd released a story. The doctor was a manipulator, the woken Don a puppet, Bianca a scapegoat murdered by Matteo to hide his own patricide. He's saying I shot my father, Matteo said flatly, reading the report. That I brought in a beautiful doctor to seduce me into it. That I killed Bianca to silence her. She's dead, by the way. Vittorio's men took her from us in the chaos of the move, and she confessed to working alone before she died. How convenient. And that now I'm holding my father hostage in a tower to control the family through a corpse. He set the phone down. It's a good story. It's better than the truth in some ways. Simpler. And half the family wants to believe it, because believing it means backing the man with the most guns. But it's a lie, Isabella said. And the one thing that proves it's a lie is lying in the next room. Which is why the next 48 hours decides everything. Matteo scrubbed his hands over his face, the first time she'd seen exhaustion break through his control. I have to produce my father, alive, awake, lucid, in front of the capos who are wavering. I have to let them see with their own eyes that he's not a vegetable, that he names Bianca and Vittorio, that the true story is the true one. If I can do that, the wavering half comes back, Vittorio's numbers collapse, and I can move on him. He looked at her. But that means bringing the capos here, into our fortress, which means opening the one door I've kept sealed. If I let the capos in, I let in men whose loyalty I'm not sure of. I could be inviting Vittorio's assassins into the one place my father is safe. Then we control it, Isabella said. She was thinking now, fast, the way she thought in an OR when everything was going wrong at once. You don't bring them to him, you bring him to them, safely, briefly, on your terms. A single controlled appearance. I get him lucid, stable, coherent for 1 hour. You gather the wavering capos in the main room, disarmed at the elevator, your men everywhere. He speaks. He names the traitor. They see the truth. Then he comes straight back to the suite, and I put him back under my care. 1 hour, 1 window, and we win the family in it. Matteo looked at her with something like awe. You'd stake his life on 1 hour. I stake lives on hours every day. She held his gaze. It's what I do, Matteo. It's the only thing I know how to do in your world. I can't hold a gun. I can't command your men. But I can give you 1 hour of a lucid dawn. And if that's the weapon that wins this, then let me be the one who loads it. They set it for the following night, which was also, by the cruel arithmetic of the courier, the night the DNA results would arrive. The day passed in unbearable tension. Isabella prepared her patient with everything she had, optimizing his lucidity, timing his medications, coaching his fragile memory gently back toward the night of the shooting so the thread would hold when the capo's eyes were on him. Alessandro, in his lucid stretches, understood exactly what was being asked of him, and there was steel in the old monster yet. 1 hour of clarity, he rasped, gripping her hand, to save my son, to destroy my brother. A grim smile ghosted across his ruined face. For that, girl, I'll claw my way up out of hell itself. He studied her. You'll be there, beside me? Every second. Good. His eyes softened into that wondering look again, the Lucia look. I want you beside me. It feels right, having you close, like something owed, like something I lost a long time ago, come back to me. He drifted. Lucia's girl, keeping me alive. There's a poetry in it that God only writes for men who don't deserve it. Isabella said nothing. She couldn't, because in a matter of hours, a lab in New Jersey would tell her whether the poetry was a benediction or a curse, whether this man was a stranger who'd loved her mother from afar or her father, which would make the man she loved forbidden to her forever. She threw herself into the work to keep from thinking about it. It was the only defense she had ever had. Matteo came to her an hour before the capos were due, and he was dressed for war, a black suit, no tie, and beneath the jacket she could see the hard line of a shoulder holster. The Iceman was back, the cold, controlled machine, because the machine was what tonight required. But his eyes, when they found hers, were not cold at all. The results came, he said quietly. Isabella's whole body went rigid. She had been dreading and craving this moment for 48 hours. And? He held up a sealed envelope. His hand, she noticed with a jolt, because Matteo Caruso's hands never shook, was not quite steady. I haven't opened it. He crossed to her. I couldn't. Not alone. Whatever's in here changes everything, and I found I couldn't look at it without you. He pressed it into her hands. We find out together. Now, before I walk into that room and go to war, I want to know what I'm fighting for. Whether it's a woman I can love in the daylight or... His jaw tightened. Or blood I have to protect from a different kind of harm. Isabella looked down at the envelope. Her hands, her surgeon's hands, her mother's hands, held the answer to whether her heart was a sin. "I'm scared," she admitted. She, who was never scared, who had built a self that fear couldn't reach. "Matteo, I've never been scared like this. In the OR, I can control everything. Here, I can't control anything. If it says he's my father..." "Then we survive it." His hands closed over hers, around the envelope. "The way we've survived everything else in this house of nightmares. Together. As whatever we're allowed to be. I won't lose you either way, Isabella. As my love or as my family. I keep you. I protect you. That doesn't change." He drew a breath. "But God, I'm praying. For the first time since I was a boy, I'm praying that I get to love you the way I want to, in the light, as mine." Isabella closed her eyes. Then, with the same steady precision she'd bring to the first incision of an impossible surgery, she slid her thumb under the seal and opened the envelope. She unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned the clinical language, the probabilities, the loci, the cold mathematics of blood, and found the line that mattered. Probability of paternity, 0%. Alessandro Caruso is excluded as the biological father of the tested individual. The paper trembled. Isabella read it again and again. And then the breath she'd been holding for 48 hours came out of her in a great, shuddering rush, and her knees went, and Matteo caught her. 0, she gasped. 0%. He's not... Matteo, he's not my father. He loved my mother. He watched over me. He opened all those doors, but he's not... The timing was a coincidence. My mother left him and found someone else, or there was someone before. I don't... But he's not my father. She was laughing and crying at once, half hysterical with relief. I'm not his daughter. You're not my cousin. It's not... We're not blood. Matteo's arms crushed her against him, and she felt him shaking too, felt the iron control finally break, felt the machine become entirely a man. You're not mine to protect as family. You're mine to love as... He pulled back just far enough to look at her, and his eyes were wet, and his voice was raw. As the woman I choose, in the daylight, the way I promised. And then, finally, after 3 months of not yet, Matteo Caruso kissed her. But it was interrupted almost as soon as it began by a knock at the door, and Sal's voice, tense. Boss, the capos are here, and there's a problem. Vittorio came with them, under a flag of truce, he says. He's standing in your own front room, Matteo. He walked right into your fortress. He says he's come to talk, or to finish it. Matteo's arms tightened around Isabella one last second. Then the machine came back down over his face like a visor. Then he's come to die, Matteo said quietly. Get my father ready, Isabella. It's time. The great room of the penthouse was a stage of glass and shadow, the whole glittering nightscape of Manhattan spread behind it like a painted backdrop, and onto that stage the last act of the Caruso War walked itself in the space of an hour. Vittorio had come with 8 men and a smile, betting everything on a single audacious move, to walk into his nephew's stronghold under truce in front of the wavering capos and win the family with words, before Matteo could win it with his father. He stood in the centre of the room, silver and elegant, master of the room as he had always been master of every room, and he spread his hands to the assembled captains. "So," Vittorio said warmly, "here we all are, the family, fractured, brother against brother's son, guns drawn over a doctor and a dead girl's ravings. This is not what Alessandro built. This is chaos, and chaos serves no one but our enemies." His eyes moved over the capos, reading them, working them. "I've come, unarmed, into my nephew's home to offer peace. Let the doctor go back to her hospital. Let my poor brother rest. Let me, the eldest Caruso, the last of the old blood, steward this family back to strength, while the boy learns to lead with his head instead of his—" "Instead of my what, uncle?" Matteo's voice came from the shadows at the edge of the room, and every head turned. He stepped into the light, and Isabella watched the capos see him. Not the lovesick boy Vittorio had painted, but a man in a black suit with a gun on his hip and death in his eyes, moving like something that had finally stopped being afraid. "Say it. Instead of my heart. You've built your whole play on the idea that I'm weak because I feel things, that a man who loves is a man who can be broken." He came to a stop, facing his uncle across the glittering room. "You've made a mistake that's going to cost you everything, Vittorio. You think love made me weak. It made me dangerous. Because now, for the first time in my life, I have something I'm not afraid to lose everything for. Poetry." Vittorio's smile didn't waver. "The boy speaks poetry while the family bleeds. Capos, do you hear the man you'd follow? He'll start a war with the Salernos over a broken engagement, a war with me over a dead assassin, a war with the whole world over a woman he kidnapped 3 months ago. Is that leadership? Or is that a child playing with fire in a house made of gunpowder?" Some of the capos shifted. It was working, Isabella saw with a chill. Vittorio was good. He was turning the room with nothing but his voice and their fear, and for one terrible moment the balance tipped his way. And that was the moment Matteo had been waiting for. "You're right about one thing, uncle," Matteo said. "The family shouldn't follow me. Not while its true head still lives." He raised his voice, and it filled the glass room. "Bring him in." The doors opened, and Isabella wheeled Don Alessandro Caruso into the room. She had spent every ounce of her skill on this hour. He sat upright in the chair, dressed in a dark suit that hung loose on his diminished frame, his bandaged head held high, his eyes, she had timed his medications to the minute, clear and burning and lucid. He looked frail, he looked ancient, but he looked unmistakably alive and aware, and the effect on the room was seismic. The capos, who had been told the Don was a vegetable, a corpse propped up to fool them, went pale as they saw the truth walk in on the arm of a physician. "My friends," Alessandro's voice was a wreck, but it carried, and every man in that room had spent his life leaning in to hear this man's ruined whisper. "You were told I was gone, that my son holds my body to steal my throne." His eyes found Vittorio, and they blazed. "Look at me. Am I gone? Or am I here? awake, in my right mind, because that woman there dragged me back from death with her own 2 hands. His trembling finger rose, and it pointed, dead steady with the strength of pure hatred, at his brother. My brother put me here. My brother and the girl he planted in my son's bed. Bianca Salerno held the gun. Vittorio Caruso loaded it. The old Don's voice cracked with fury. He tried to murder me and blame my son. My son. And you honourable men, you who kissed my hand and swore on your mothers, half of you were ready to follow the man who shot me in my own study while I spoke to him of family. The room went utterly silent. Vittorio's smile finally died. The old man is confused, he said, but there was a new note in his voice now, the note of a man who feels the ground giving way. Brain damaged, the doctor coached him. The doctor, Alessandro rasped, is the only person in this family with clean hands, and you— He struggled to his feet, Isabella steadying him, the whole room watching this broken titan rise. You are not my brother any more, Vittorio. You are a dead man who hasn't been buried yet. He looked at the capos. I am Don Alessandro Caruso. I name my son Matteo, my heir and my acting head, with my full authority and my full mind. And I name my brother Vittorio, traitor and morto. Anyone who stands with him from this moment stands against the blood of Caruso. His burning eyes swept them all. Choose. Now, while I still draw breath to see it. And Isabella watched the family choose. One by one, the wavering capos turned away from Vittorio, turned toward the Don and his heir, the ancient gravity of legitimacy and witnessed truth pulling them home. Vittorio's 8 men felt it, felt their side collapsing, and their hands drifted toward their jackets, and Matteo's men, everywhere, on every wall, exactly as Isabella had known they would be, drew first. Don't, Matteo said softly, and it was over before it began. Vittorio's men were disarmed, surrounded, folded back into the family that had abandoned their patron in the space of a single minute. Vittorio Caruso stood alone in the centre of the glittering room, stripped of his guns, his story, his family, his lover, and his last gambit. And Isabella saw the exact moment the master strategist understood he had lost everything. Matteo, Vittorio said, and now the silk was gone entirely, replaced by naked calculation. Nephew, blood, we can still— No, Matteo said, we can't. He looked at his father, who nodded once, and the nod was a death sentence. Matteo drew his gun. You should have understood what I told you, uncle. Love didn't make me weak. Isabella did not watch the end of Vittorio Caruso. She turned away, not out of squeamishness, though there was that, but because her patient was swaying on his feet, the great effort of his hour of clarity spending itself, and her hands and her attention belonged to him. She heard Matteo's voice, low, giving orders. She heard the room clear. She did not hear the shot, because there was no shot in that room full of witnesses and wavering loyalties. Matteo Caruso was too intelligent to make his uncle a martyr in front of the family he'd just won back. What happened to Vittorio happened later, elsewhere. quietly, in the way such things happened in their world, and Isabella never asked, and Matteo never told, and that silence became the first of the small mercies they would build their strange life upon. What she knew was this. By the time the sun rose again over Manhattan, the war was over. It had lasted in the end less than 4 days from the morning Alessandro woke to the night Vittorio fell. A bloodless coup and a bloody purge folded into one, the way Matteo had needed it to be. The capos who had wavered came back into the fold, shamed and loyal and grateful for the mercy of being allowed to. The men who had been Vittorio's core, the bought loyalists, the ones who'd tripped the alarm, the ones who'd taken Bianca and staged her convenient confession and death, those men Matteo dealt with in the days that followed, methodically, coldly, permanently. Isabella did not ask about them either. She was learning the terrible geography of loving a man like Matteo. There were rooms in his life she could not enter, could not want to enter, and the price of the daylight he'd promised her was accepting the darkness that made the daylight possible. She wrestled with it. She was, after all, a woman who had built her entire self on being good, on clean hands, on an oath that said first, do no harm. And she had fallen in love with a man whose life was harm, refined and disciplined and directed, but harm. She said as much to him on the 5th night, when the worst was over and they stood together at the glass wall watching the city. I don't know how to reconcile it, she admitted. What you are, what you have to do. I saw your uncle's face when he understood he was going to die, and part of me was glad, Matteo, glad. And I've spent my whole life saving lives, and that gladness frightens me. Who am I becoming in your world? Matteo was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, he didn't defend himself, which she loved him for. You're becoming someone who sees clearly, he said. That's all. You always saw clearly. It's why you're the best at what you do. It's why you saw the contact wound and Bianca and Vittorio when no one else could. You didn't stop being good, Isabella. You just stopped being able to pretend the world is simpler than it is. He turned to her. I won't lie to you and tell you I'm a good man. I'm not. I've done things tonight, and I'll do things tomorrow that would put me in your hell, if your hell is real. But I promise you 2 things, and I'll keep them until I die. He took her hands. I will never lie to you. Not once, not ever, not about anything, no matter how ugly. You'll always have the truth from me, even when the truth is monstrous. And I will never, ever let this life touch you. You'll live in the daylight. The blood stays on my hands, not yours. You keep your oath, you keep your clean hands. That's the deal. That's the only way I know how to love someone like you without destroying them. His jaw tightened. My father destroyed your mother's chance at a clean life just by loving her. I won't repeat his mistake. You'll have both, me and yourself. I swear it. Isabella looked at him, this dangerous, beautiful man who had stolen her from a parking garage and given her, in the theft, the first time in her life she'd been wanted instead of merely needed. That's an impossible promise, she said softly. I'm good at impossible things. A ghost of a smile. I woke my father, unmasked a traitor, won back a family, and cleared the way to love a woman who cuts open skulls for a living. Impossible is Tuesday for me now. She laughed, a real laugh the first in months, and stepped into his arms, and this time no one knocked, no one interrupted, no war intervened, and Matteo Caruso, finally, in the daylight glitter of the city he ruled from the shadows, kissed the woman he'd chosen, the way he'd wanted to, for 3 months. Not the desperate, stolen kiss of the storm, a slow kiss, a claiming and a surrender at once, a kiss that said, "Mine, at last, in the light, and no more, not yet." Alessandro Caruso recovered slowly and imperfectly, and never fully. The bullet had taken things from his brain that even Isabella's hands could not give back. He would walk with a cane the rest of his life. His memory would flicker and fail. His grand reign was, everyone understood, over. He was Don in name and blessing, but Matteo ruled now, and the family accepted it, because a Don who'd been shot in the head and dragged back to name his heir had earned the right to rest. But he had good days, and on the good days he would sit in the sun of the penthouse terrace and talk to Isabella for hours, about her mother, about Lucia's laugh, about the girl he'd loved before the family made him into what he became. He gave Isabella her mother back, in pieces, in stories she'd never heard. He gave her the answer, too, to the mystery of her whole lucky life. "I opened the doors, girl, but you walked through them. The walking was always yours." And once, on a very good day, he took her hand and said, "You're not my blood. The test said so, and thank God, because it lets my boy love you, and my boy has never loved anything, and I thought he never would." His faded eyes searched hers. "But I want you to know, if I'd had a daughter, I'd have wanted her to be you, Lucia's girl, clean hands and a spine of steel. You saved my life. You saved my son. You're not my blood, Isabella, but you're my family now, whether the test likes it or not." Isabella wept and did not pull her hand away. The engagement to the Salernos was the last knot to cut, and it nearly cut them. With Bianca dead and her treachery exposed, the marriage treaty that had bound the Caruso and Salerno families for 2 decades lay in ruins. And old Don Salerno, Bianca's father, was not a man to accept the murder of his daughter, however guilty she'd been, without answer. For 3 tense weeks, it seemed the war Matteo had ended within his own family might reignite between 2 families instead, precisely the catastrophe the arranged marriage had existed to prevent. Isabella watched Matteo navigate it, and in the watching she finally understood the man she'd chosen, not the cold killer, not the tender lover of the dark sick room, but the leader, the strategist, the ruler, who held 10,000 lives in the balance and moved them like a chess master, playing for the survival of everyone on the board. He did not go to war with the Salernos. He went to Don Salerno's home, alone but for Sal, and he laid the whole truth before the grieving father. The affair with Vittorio, the assassination, the frame, the confession. And he did the one thing Isabella had never seen him do. He offered his own throat. "Your daughter shot my father and tried to destroy my family," Matteo told the old man in the account he gave Isabella later. "And your daughter was seduced and used and thrown away by a man twice her age who's now dead for it. We are both wronged, Salerno. You lost a daughter to Vittorio's ambition. I lost 3 months of my father's life to it. If you want blood for blood, here I am. But if you want the truth is that Vittorio Caruso is the man who cost us both, and he's already paid. Let it end with him. Let our families grieve what he took instead of taking more from each other. It should not have worked, but it did, because Matteo offered respect where Salerno expected arrogance, and truth where he expected lies, and because a father, told his dead daughter had been a pawn rather than a monster, found something almost like peace in it. The treaty died. The peace, remarkably, held, and Matteo Caruso emerged from it with a reputation that would define the rest of his reign. The Don who ended a war with truth instead of bullets, whose word was iron, whom it was better to have as a friend than an enemy. "You could have crushed them," Isabella said when he told her. "You had the strength after Vittorio. Why didn't you?" "Because I'm tired of the cost," Matteo said simply. "My whole life has been paid for in blood. My mother's, my father's, Vittorio's, Bianca's, men whose names you'll never know. I'm the Don now. I get to decide what this family costs, and I've decided—" He looked at her. "I've decided it's going to cost less. Because I want a life, Isabella, with you. And you can't build a life on a foundation of endless funerals. My father never understood that. It's why he lost your mother. It's why he ended up with a bullet in his brain from his own blood." His jaw set. "I'm going to be a different kind of Don. Still dangerous, still feared, but different. And you're the reason. You're the thing worth building a smaller, quieter, deadlier peace for." But there was a cost, and Isabella paid part of it too, and it was this. She could never fully go back. They tried at first to give her back her old life alongside the new one. Matteo arranged, with a quiet phone call that opened doors the way his father's calls once had, for her 3-month leave to be smoothed over. A family emergency abroad, all documented, all deniable. Her position at Mercy Grace waited for her. She could, in theory, put on her scrubs and walk back into her old, spotless life as though she'd never been stolen from a parking garage. She lasted 6 weeks back at the hospital before she understood it was impossible. Not because of the work. The work was still the thing she loved, the clean, bright certainty of the OR, the privilege of holding a life in her hands. But because she went home each night not to her quiet Upper West Side apartment, but to a penthouse in the sky guarded by armed men, to a man whose empire she now understood, to a life she could tell no one about. She lived a double existence. Dr. Isabella Conti, respected neurosurgeon by day, and by night, the woman who belonged to Matteo Caruso, who had watched a man be sentenced to death in a glass room over Manhattan and had felt glad. The two selves could not fully be reconciled. Her mother's daughter, clean-handed and good, and the woman who loved a monster and had made her peace with his darkness. She talked to Matteo about it because he'd promised her the truth and demanded it in return. "I don't regret it," she told him one night, on the terrace that had become the place they told each other true things. Us. I want you to know that, whatever else I say, I don't regret choosing you." She wrapped her arms around herself. "But I lost something, Matteo. The woman I was, the one who thought precision could keep her safe, who thought if she was just good enough and necessary enough, the world would be simple. She's gone. I killed her the night I decided to love you instead of running." And some nights I miss her. Some nights I mourn her. Matteo came to stand behind her, wrapped his arms around her, rested his chin on her hair. I mourn a lot of versions of myself, he said, quietly. The boy before my mother died, the man before I understood what my father really was. We don't get to keep every version of ourselves, Isabella. We trade them for the life we actually get to live. He turned her to face him. The question isn't whether you miss her, it's whether you trade the woman standing here now, the one who saved my father, unmasked a traitor, stared down my uncle, and chose me with her eyes wide open, for the woman who thought the world was simple. His eyes held hers. Would you? Isabella thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. No, she said at last. No, I wouldn't. I like her better, God help me, the one who sees clearly. She almost smiled. You did that. You and this terrible, beautiful family. You made me braver than I ever wanted to be. Good. He kissed her forehead. Because I have one more terrifying thing to ask you, and I need you brave for it. Isabella's heart stuttered. Matteo! But he was already reaching into his jacket, and what he drew out was not a gun. It was a ring, of course. But it was not the kind of ring Bianca Salerno had worn, not a knuckle-sized declaration of a treaty between families, not a diamond meant to be seen across a ballroom and priced by rivals. It was a slim, antique band, an old rose-cut stone gone soft and warm with age, and Isabella knew it the instant she saw it, because Alessandro had shown it to her once, on one of his good days, turning it over in his ruined hands. "That's your mother's," she whispered. "That's... Alessandro had it. He said Lucia gave it back when she left him. He kept it for 40 years. He gave it to me last week." Matteo held it between them, and for the first time since she'd known him, the great cold Don of New York looked genuinely afraid. He said he bought it for the wrong life, the one he wasn't allowed to have, and that it should finally go to the right one. He said your mother would have wanted her daughter to have it. He said, Matteo's voice roughened, he said, give it to Lucia's girl and love her better than I loved Lucia, because I was a coward and you're not, and don't you dare let the family take her from you the way it took Lucia from me. Isabella's eyes flooded. I'm not going to give you a speech, Matteo said, and he went down, the man who bowed to no one, who had watched his uncle die and never flinched, went down on one knee on the terrace, with the whole electric sprawl of Manhattan glittering behind him. I'm not good at speeches, and you'd see through a good one anyway. So here's the truth, which is all I ever promised you. He looked up at her, and his eyes were wet and burning and entirely, finally, unguarded. I was a machine before you. I felt nothing on purpose, because feeling things gets them taken away. And then some idiot part of me kidnapped a neurosurgeon to save my father. And she walked into my house, afraid and furious and clean, and she looked at me like I was a man instead of a monster. And she saw things no one else could see. And she made me want to be alive for the first time in 20 years. His hand shook around the ring. I don't deserve you. My world doesn't deserve you. But I'm selfish. And I love you. And I've decided, the way I decide everything, that I'm going to have you, in the daylight, as mine, for the rest of my life. So marry me, Isabella Conti. Be the one thing I chose for myself instead of inherited. Be the daylight. He drew a breath. I can't promise you a simple life. I can only promise you a true one. Mine. All of it. Every ugly, honest piece. Isabella looked down at him, at Matteo Caruso, kneeling, holding her dead mother's ring, offering her a life that was dangerous and luxurious and dark and true, offering her the daylight he'd sworn to give her since a night of storms 3 months and a lifetime ago. She thought about the woman she'd been in the parking garage, careful, precise, protected, alone. A woman who trusted scalpels and almost nothing else, who had made herself so necessary that no one could throw her away, and who had never once, in all her armoured competence, been chosen. And she thought about her mother, Lucia, who had loved this family's darkness and fled it to keep her daughter clean, who had raised Isabella to be necessary and had died with a sad mouth and a secret, whose ring had waited 40 years in a monster's drawer to come home to her daughter's hand. I ran, her mother's whole life seemed to say. I chose the clean life and the safe life and the lonely life, and it kept you pure, Bella, but it also kept you from ever being loved the way this boy is offering to love you. Don't run. Don't be a coward the way Alessandro was a coward. The daylight is worth the darkness it costs. Yes, Isabella said. The word came out of her not with the careful precision she brought to everything, but wild and full and certain and free. Yes, God help me. Yes, Matteo, in the daylight. Mine and yours, all of it. Every ugly, honest piece. She dropped to her knees in front of him so they were eye to eye, so she could take his beautiful, dangerous face in her surgeon's hands, her mother's hands. I spent my whole life being necessary. Just once I wanted to be wanted, and you kidnapped me and made me the most wanted woman in New York, you impossible man. She was laughing and crying at once. And I don't want the simple life. I don't want the clean, safe, lonely life my mother chose. I want you, the true one, all of it. Matteo slid her mother's ring onto her finger, and it fit as though it had always been waiting for her. And then he kissed her, kneeling on the terrace over the glittering city, and it was not a stolen kiss, and not a desperate kiss, and not a kiss interrupted by war or blood or the breathing of a machine in a sick room. It was the daylight kiss, the one he'd promised, the one that said mine, chosen, in the light, forever, no more, not yet. They were married in the spring, in a small ceremony that broke every convention of a Caruso wedding. No political alliance, no allied family, no ballroom of rivals pricing the bride's diamonds. Just family. Sal, weeping openly, standing as best man. Renato, his tremor stilled by joy, giving a toast in Sicilian that made the old Don laugh until he cried. And Alessandro Caruso himself, frail and leaning on his cane, walking Isabella down the aisle in place of the father she'd never known, and the father he had turned out not to be. Close enough, he'd said. Close enough, Lucia's girl. Let an old man pretend. Isabella kept her practice. Matteo kept his promise. She lived in the daylight, the blood stayed on his hands. She cut open skulls and saved lives, and kept her clean hands and her oath, and at night she went home to a penthouse in the sky, and a man who had never lied to her once, not even when the truth was monstrous, and who wanted her, not needed her, wanted her, with a fierce, possessive devotion that never once, in all the years that followed, cooled into anything less than obsession. There were dangers. Of course there were dangers. It was that kind of life, that kind of love, that kind of world. There were nights Matteo came home late and silent, and she didn't ask, and mornings the news carried stories she recognized the shadows of, and always, always the guards and the armoured cars and the double life. She never fully reconciled the two selves. She simply learned to hold them both, the doctor and the Don's wife, the clean hands and the chosen darkness, the way she'd learned to hold a scalpel and a life at the same time. Precisely, steadily, wide awake. And sometimes, on the terrace over the glittering city, she'd catch her husband watching her with that same intensity he'd worn the first night in his father's sick room. The look of a man who has spent his whole life among the corrupt and cannot quite believe he was allowed to keep something clean. "What?" she'd ask. "Nothing," Matteo Caruso would say, and pull her against him, and rest his chin on her hair, and look out over the empire of shadows he ruled with a colder mercy than any Don before him. Just counting the reasons. The reasons for what? That I'd still burn it all down for you. He'd smile against her hair, the smile only she ever saw. The list never gets shorter. I've stopped hoping it will. And Isabella Conti, the devil's doctor, the neurosurgeon stolen from a parking garage, the woman who'd been chosen at last in the daylight, would lean back into the dangerous warmth of the man she'd been kidnapped to save, and had saved right back, and she would not, for anything in the world, have traded the woman she'd become. Below them, New York glittered like a spill of jewels, indifferent and eternal. Above them, only the daylight.